Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I will first read a welcome address by Eric Lombard. Dear friends, I'm proud that the Ministry of Economy, Finance, Industrial and Digital Sovereignty is hosting this study seminar on the supervision of European financial markets. I deeply regret not being able to join you this morning, as I'm currently attending the ECOFIN meeting in Brussels. However, I'm grateful to my dear friend Pervenche for giving me the opportunity to share a few words through her. A unified supervision, whether coordinated or fully centralized, seems indispensable in the current context, in line of the spirit of the Capital Market Union, which we aim to achieve with the other member states at the European level. We face a challenging geopolitical environment marked by heightened international competition, notably following the inauguration of President Trump. We are navigating major macroeconomic transition toward a decarbonized economy and the rise of artificial intelligence. Meanwhile, national stock exchange need to be able to offer the same financial market deeps to our company and startup than American and Asian counterparts. The prospect of a unified or even centralized supervision for European financial markets, inspired by the model of the US Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC, is a compelling way to strengthen the integration and competitiveness of European markets. Such an authority could undoubtedly ensure harmonized oversight, contributing to the unification, the integration, and stabilization of capital markets. More specifically, it would enable the development of a European financial market case law and therefore improve the harmonization of the European business law. Harmonizing regulation and reducing regulatory and supervisory disparities among member states would make cross-border investment easier by providing economic actors with a clear and consistent framework. This harmonization would also improve systemic risk management and enhance our capacity to regulate crypto assets and fintechs. Additionally, such a framework would reinforce investor confidence by ensuring greater transparency, thereby reducing compliance cost for business. Moreover, it would make European markets more competitive internationally, enabling them to rival financial hubs such as New York or Hong Kong. However, no one is unaware of the challenges posed by harmonizing that push towards full integration. Member state resistance to transferring sovereignty, structural and cultural differences, and the potential distance from local reality, so dear to me, are significant hurdles to consider. I therefore commend the tremendous relevance of your work, which will advance this important issue. Legal predictability, financial attractiveness, and ultimately the competitiveness of the European financial ecosystem are central challenges for the coming years. I wish you a rich and high-level discussion, which I am confident will be the case given the caliber of your panel. I look forward to reading the proceeding of your conference, and should you conclude that a single supervisor is essential, do not hesitate to suggest France as headquarters. We have proven with the IMF that we are capable of delivering recognized and responsive supervision. We will now listen to a message by Enrico Letta, who was not able to join us, but who was really willing to deliver this message. Thank you.
I thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here, even if only remotely. And I would like to leave you a message that is for me fundamental and very meaningful. And the message is the message about the importance of the integration of financial markets, starting from the institutional part of the dossier. I say that because I attach great importance. Your work today is fundamental because of the topic, because of the method, and I will be more than interested in reading the outcomes of this conversation today. And why I say that? Because there's usually, or at least that was my feeling traveling around Europe, meeting all the stakeholders also in the financial services, in the business world, that today the main problem at the European level is simplification. There's too much bureaucratic burdening, and the need to simplify is the number one. With the idea that institutions today are representing mostly a problem rather than solutions. In reality, I strongly believe that we need to start on the integration of the financial markets by clearly saying that the integration of the institutions regulating the markets, supervising the markets, is absolutely fundamental. It is fundamental because the lack of integration and the fragmentation, the present fragmentation, is one of the reasons of the bureaucratic, we say, crazy situation that we have in Europe. Because this bureaucratic weight that is today characterizing the European life, mostly on the economic and the financial point of view, is also because of the overlapping of the different level, le millefeuille, as the French say, and this millefeuille is linked to the fragmentation in 27 markets. With 27 regulatory authorities and all the different aspects. And the fact that each country has its own framework is creating today a great problem for the global European competitiveness. This is why what you are doing today, the big mission you have and the reflection that you will raise today are, for me, of great importance. And my report wanted to go in the same direction, focusing the importance of the integration of single markets and knowing that without the integration of the single market, the rest, in financial terms, the rest is absolutely secondary. There's a strong link between the integration of financial markets in a single financial market at the European level and competitiveness, growth, and scale. We all are saying that we need scale, we need European champions, we need to be at the level of Chinese and Americans. But the condition, the precondition to get that result is to be able to exit from this 27 fragmented puzzle and to be able to work in a unified level at the European level. So this is why I write a report and I'm presenting a report everywhere in Europe. I'm invited in the different capitals, in the different countries. I'm presenting the report in the national parliaments. This week is the week of the Greek parliament, where I can tell you that with great emotion I will take the floor presenting the report, but it is the same for many other national parliaments. Last week I was at the European Parliament to discuss with the members of the European Parliament the solutions that I put in the report, and I'm very glad that Ursula von der Leyen put some of the most important part of the report in the roadmaps for the commissioners. And I'm very glad that the European Council, the last one on competitiveness in Budapest, took a very important and meaningful conclusion document raising competitiveness, and my report and Draghi's report as the key issues. So I will read the conclusion of today's seminar, and I wish you all the best for today. Thank you.
The way the supervision of financial markets is structured in the EU triggers regularly passionate debates. It's not surprising, since there is a strong national sovereignty dimension in this issue. Compared to the US, or viewed from the US, the EU supervisory landscape of financial markets appears indeed a bit odd and largely ineffective. I like to quote Howell Jackson. Howell Jackson is a prominent professor of law at the Harvard Law School, discussing in a 2015 paper the mutual recognition of substituted compliance the US could apply with the EU. I quote him: on almost any plausible metric of objective performance, regulatory resources, enforcement efforts, objective indicia of market performance, or presence of foreign investors, the distance between the better developed and less developed European markets is substantial. The variation in supervisory and market quality militates in favor of a focus on individual member states as a preferable point of contact. But the genius of the EU internal market is the free flow of goods and services, which permits issuers located in one jurisdiction to list their securities in another member state markets, and allows financial services firms to branch, and he could have had to passport the services, across the region's boundaries. Thus, even if the US Commission were to conclude that market oversight within a single EU jurisdiction was comparable to that of the USA, concern would still arise whether products sold in that country market and all firms doing business in that market were fully subject to the member states' oversight. During the last 10 years, the picture has not dramatically improved. A bit one, but not that many. The distance mentioned by Howell Jackson remains huge, and neither national supervisor nor any European supervisor has the oversight of all financial activities performed in a member state. Actually, every national home supervisor is supposed to be in charge of all activities performed EU-wide from its country. Since in some cases it becomes blatantly unacceptable for host member states, the natural tendency is to increase the power of host supervisors on top of the responsibility of home supervisor. And we can see it in the context of the retail investment strategy discussion. While obviously the appropriate answer would be increasing the power of the European authority, actually the ESMA. But transferring powers from the national to the European level is always a politically sensitive topic. The subsidiarity principle and the Meroni doctrine are two pillars of the EU frameworks. Obviously, a responsibility should be endorsed. I always read what I write, because should be endorsed at union level is only two cases: when member states are unable to fulfill it properly, or when carrying it to a higher EU level provides significant added value. In any case, every time powers are transferred to an agency of the Union, the legal underpinning must be very, very solid. Therefore, there is a need to have an in-depth review of all supervisory duties in financial market matters in order to decide which could remain under the national remit, with strong oversight by ESMA, and which should be directly put under the remit of ESMA. Such a review is not straightforward, since failure by national supervisory authorities to properly carry the supervisory remit is always a sensitive topic, and even when it is materialized, there are always ways to improve the performance. Actually, the idea would be more to elaborate on the significant added value side, combining it with the first criterion. In order to allow the national supervisory authorities to perform properly their responsibilities, you will complicate even more the current supervisory landscape and make it unworkable. The value added by carrying this responsibility at EU level will then become evident. Our debate paper at the IAFR is a contribution to this review, which is all the more necessary that the current fractioned supervisory landscape appears now clearly to hinder the efficiency of our capital markets and should be thoroughly revised if we want to be serious on capital markets union or union of saving and investment. I will not preempt the discussions that will take place this morning, but I will just introduce it with two cases I have encountered during my time at the IMF, and which could advocate for a European supervision instead of a collection of national supervisions. First of all, asset management. Large asset managers have a physical presence in most EU member states and market their services and funds EU-wide. For example, BlackRock has a location in 14 EU member states, Amundi in 17 EU member states, with consolidated subsidiaries in 11 member states. More broadly, when you look at the asset management industry and its regulatory framework, you are struck with its multinational structure. You are licensed in one country, you delegate the portfolio management or some other tasks to firms in another country. These firms could be part of the group or not. You register funds in another jurisdiction with a custodian, which could be in another jurisdiction, and you sell your funds elsewhere. Even in the EU, where you believe that you have a single rule book, it's not fully the case, with different national transposition of the same directives and different interpretation, different supervisory and enforcement stances regarding the same requirements. At the end of the day, you have multiple national competent authority, but none in charge of the supervision of the group, with some overlapping responsibilities, each with its own enforcement framework and without any structured way of cooperation between them, even if, we should be fair, the informal cooperation works relatively well in most cases. Is it a major issue? Could be. End of August 2020, several UCITS funds registered in France and representing a net asset value of around 10 billion euro were suspended. It was one episode of the H2O saga, and I will briefly comment this exceptional event from a pure supervisory perspective without entering into the details, since the case is still subject to litigation not yet decided by the courts. H2O Asset Management was a UK asset manager. At that time, the UK was still in the EU, and a subsidiary of a French-listed bank, part of a group directly supervised by the ECB as a GTIB, and had still more than 20 billion assets under management in funds. Mainly UCIT registered in France, 11 billion, and to a lesser extent in Ireland, Luxembourg, and the UK, with in some cases feeder funds. H2O was selling its funds in many member states and beyond in the EU. At the end of August 2020, the IMF requested the suspension of 3 UCITS funds with 4.8 net asset value, and H2O extended rightly the suspension to 4 other UCITS, adding it to 10 billion of suspended funds. H2O indicated that it will side pocket and liquidate the illiquid, difficult to value assets and open new UCITS with the liquid assets. Good, if I may say so. 10 billion French suspended UCITS had been marketed at risky. 4 billion had been sold in France, largely in the framework of unit-linked life insurance policies. 3.1 billion have been sold in Italy, 1 billion in the rest of the EU, and so on and so on. This was an emblematic case by its magnitude, but its recourse to side pockets, which is a relatively purely national tool, by its transnational nature, and it raised many supervisory issues. First of all, what are the exact perimeter of responsibilities of the various supervisors? Between the national competence authority of the jurisdiction where the funds are incorporated, where the asset management firm is located, on where the funds are marketed. What type of responsibility has the supervisors of parent company? And in any case, you need to have a cooperative approach between a huge number of supervisors, but you also have to take rapidly the appropriate decisions. Second, you need to determine the appropriate trade-off between investor protection versus financial stability. While suspension could be decided taking primarily into account the interest of investors, consequences for financial stability should not be ignored. Both have a European dimension, since investors are spread between many countries and financial stability goes well beyond the national borders. From an investor protection angle, one should have in mind that in some cases, well, not that case, but in some cases, the funds that are incorporated in one jurisdiction are not at all marketed in this jurisdiction. From the financial stability angle, you have to analyze interconnectedness and possible contagion in order to assess what would be the consequences of the suspensions. And we all have in mind the role of the suspension of some BNP funds in July 2007. You need to assess the consequences on funds investing in these suspended funds and on insurance contracts based on these funds. You need to assess the consequences on other funds or mandates that the asset manager has and the consequences on similar funds managed by other asset managers. You should assess the consequences on the parent banking group, and so on and so on. In the H2O case, we have avoided a major crisis, but let us be clear. The current fragmented supervisory landscape is not efficient and could be very detrimental in case of crisis. I don't think you can rely on a sole national authority to take decisions that will impact the investors who are mainly in other located in another member state and could affect the financial stability of the whole EU. If you organize a proper cooperation between the high list of that many supervisors, many of them being national authorities, crisis will become unmanageable. The value added by carrying the supervisory responsibility at EU level is absolutely evident from my side, having said that. Let me take, and I will finish after that, let me take another example, which is market abuses. As you may know, there are many ways for detecting market abuses. Allow me to simplify the picture. National security in charge, who is the authority of the most liquid market for this specific security, can do it internally by monitoring the market and could rely on external sources, mainly the suspicious transaction and order reports, what we call stores. That should be drafted by, these stores should be drafted by trading venues and by any person professionally arranging or executing transactions, basically investment firms. In France, the IMF has developed a sophisticated system for market monitoring based on transactions executed and based also on order books. In other member states, the reliance on stores is heavier. Nevertheless, as a competent authority, you need to cover the whole market and monitor transactions taking place outside your jurisdiction. So you need stores and data. Actually, you have stores and you have data on transactions taking place in another member state, which are centralized by ESMA, but you don't have now currently order books from those member states which are not in your jurisdiction. More importantly, when you develop your policy in that market abuse domain, you hope that regarding supervision and enforcement, the tools and the stance of national authorities are broadly harmonized. it's fair to say that it's not the case, which means that the integrity of the EU market is not consistently ensured. Some data to illustrate these differences: stores reported in Germany represent around 40% of the EEA total, but Germany represents 5% of the monetary amounts of the sanctions for infringement of the market abuse regulation. France represents 70% of these sanctions. In some member states, Ireland and Slovakia, no sanction has ever been decided for market abuse. Such a heterogeneity is obviously not acceptable in a single market. The ESMA, in its recent report on sanctions and measures imposed under some EU regulation, remains very diplomatic. There is no clear linkage between the effectiveness of NCA's supervision and the number of enforcement measures imposed, as the use of sanction is just one of multiple tools available to NCAs following supervisory activities. However, despite these limitations, there is room for more convergence between NCAs. The sanctioning powers are not equally used among NCAs, and the differences are not always related to the different size of the financial industry that NCAs supervise. Quote, end of quote. Diplomatic way of putting things. The 2024 review of MAR has only partially enhanced this framework, recognizing that in order to protect market integrity in the context of an increasing integration of markets and of heightened risk of cross-border market abuse, competent authorities are invited to increase their cooperation, and ESMA should be able to act at the initiative of one or more competent authority to facilitate this cooperation. A first step in the generalization of the use of order data in the monitoring of market activity has also been taken. In order to enhance the effectiveness of supervision, competent authorities supervising markets that have a high level of cross-border activity will have to set up a mechanism to exchange order data, but on an ongoing basis through ESMA and starting with shares. But once again, cooperation remains mainly optional, and the use of order data, that is key if you intend to detect and assess market manipulations, remains a possibility at the discretion of competent authority. The limits of these new steps are obvious. Actually, without a unified system of market monitoring managed by ESMA, we are very far from having a consistent approach for detecting market abuses, a key prerequisite for a capital market union. I will stop here and hope that our roundtables this morning will help develop a large agreement on some key progress that could be achieved in order to improve the efficiency of our supervisory landscape. And we will jump to the first roundtable with two very prominent regulators / supervisor, Stephen Major and Verena Ross, and two members of very distinguished think tanks. Please come in. So, a European style SEC, utopia or necessity. So, perhaps no need to introduce participants, they are all well known. If you, I will start with the first topic, because all of you have made proposals on EU capital market supervision, and we will start with sharing briefly your views on what should be done, and we will try to be as precise as possible vis-à-vis regarding the activities institution that deserves centralized supervision and how to proceed. I will start with you, Stephen, if you don't mind. because you have, there has been a joint paper published by DNB and AFM recently, which advocates for a step-by-step approach in this direction. Perhaps you could elaborate a bit on what you see under this step-by-step approach.
Thank you very much, Robert, for that introduction, and obviously very happy to respond to that question. Interestingly, I've been positioned as ESMA, and of course, I have still very warm feelings around ESMA, but I think it's right to also pay credit to my current employer, which is the Central Bank of the Netherlands. You know, I feel completely comfortable with both labels, also because indeed, and as Robert says, is that DNB and AFM have published a paper regarding ESMA and regarding supervisory powers. I must say I had limited, you know, I felt completely satisfied or comfortable when this was presented by DNB AFM staff, and the direction was not pushed by me. To be fair, also to DNB and AFM, it was also naturally coming from the organization, and I think generally DNB and AFM are very much a supporter of stronger central supervision for ESMA. I think Robert already gave clear examples where it would be very logical to progress in terms of central supervision, asset management, and in the area of market abuse. Personally, the one that I always have in mind is around CCPs, where I find the gap even more blatantly strong in terms of technical arguments why you should have central supervision. You can jokingly say that we have more CCP supervisors in Europe than we have CCPs, which obviously doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense that they are directly supervised for the CCPs outside the EU while not supervised within the EU. And I understand the wishes to have more clearing activity in the EU, but it's very difficult then to reconcile with the movement that it would move to the national level in terms of supervision. If we consider this to be so important from a stability perspective, then it should also be supervised at EU level. So I think the argument there is very clear from a supervisory perspective, but also from, let's say, the industry perspective. It seems to be very, very clear why you would like to have EU level supervision here, because the time it takes to progress, for example, on new clearing services, to get the approval in the EU, we're just too slow there compared to non-EU markets in terms of getting approval for new clearing services. And so there's not only, I think, a stability supervisory argument, I think there's also a competitiveness argument. The other ones that I had high on my list, in addition to CCPs, is trading venues and also the large asset managers. I think we will get to that point later on when we make the comparison with CCPs, with the SSM and with banks. Obviously, central supervision in capital markets is somewhat more complicated than, for example, in banking. And there are a number of reasons for that. It is generally much less concentrated, for example, in asset management. This is not in the case of, I would say, CCPs, and to some extent trading venues are a mid-category, so it's less concentrated. The other reason why it is more complex, for example, it focuses on client interactions, on consumer interaction, while prudential supervision to some extent, but just to explain it very briefly, is more back office oriented. It's about the balance sheet, it's about, it is not about the millions of interactions, primarily with clients and consumers. So I think that complicates matters. On the other hand, these complexities are less relevant, for example, regarding CCPs and trading venues. That's the reason that they are high on my list. And I think the argument for the asset managers, these asset managers are already more integrated than the supervisors. And obviously, that is not a situation you want to be in as a regulator and as supervisors. Then on the AEFR paper, I generally agree with the direction. Personally, I wouldn't select the SEC, but I think it's done to make it a bit more provocative. But I think we have the SSM, and I think there's even examples within ESMA where we directly supervise, for example, credit rating agencies. CSDs, I'm less convinced, because there my impression, our assessment is that the links with the national arrangements is so still strong that they wouldn't be high on my list. Maybe quickly 2 more points. First, I think it is important to do this. It would be more effective supervision, it would be more efficient, it would help market participants. On the other hand, it will not be the key lever to get the CMU or the Saving and Investments Union going. Just making again the comparison with the banking union. The banking union has been very strong in terms of risk reduction, stability, but has been less effective in terms of integrating banking markets. And I think we should take that into account also regarding CMU and the Saving and Investments Union. And to some extent, this is much more a political issue than a technical issue. The technical arguments are so strong that to some extent the debate that we need to have is much more a political debate than a technical debate. Let me stop here.
By the way, the ESMA has the ESMA has also made its contribution to the enhancements of the capital market in the EU. But of course, the specificities of ESMA means that you have flagged criteria, but not institutions. Perhaps you can elaborate on that, because criteria was relatively clear. But how you analyze the consequences of applying these criteria you have mentioned in your report to the financial landscape?
No, thank you very much, and great pleasure to be here, and even more of a pleasure to speak just after Stephen. So obviously this is a historical continuation in terms of ESMA growing over time, and this is now the debate about how and where to go next. I think in terms of our role, obviously it is about making sure that the European markets are safe, transparent, fair and stable. And we do that and we fulfill that function together with the national supervisors. So I think it is very important to continuously emphasize that it is important to drive a common approach to supervision. We have, I think, tried to do that in the vast majority of the areas together through driving supervisory convergence. But I think it's also fair to say, and as some of the examples that Robert has quoted, is that our tools have their limits there. And that is why in the environment where we are now, we still have enormous fragmentation and unlevel playing fields, despite all of our best efforts on driving more convergence and more common supervisory approaches. I think leads us now, and rightly so, to question again, also at a political level, why we don't take an extra step forward as Europe to make sure that we can live up to what we need to have in terms of capital markets in the European Union. And in terms of how to do that and reduce the fragmentation, we have come up with this position paper that you quoted from, which was a position that was fully and unanimously supported by the ESMA board, which after all has the 27 national supervisors sitting on it and supporting it. And that, I think, is also a very interesting indication, because it actually shows that the people who are in charge of doing this at national level actually see the necessity to at least look very seriously in which areas it would make sense to make an extra step to more European supervision. And here, I think, as you say, we build on a couple of key criteria. One of them, not surprisingly, is to make sure that we look at what is the significance in a cross-border context. So where are these entities actually currently operating in a way that is not servicing just the investors, the companies in a particular market, but they're really there and providing services on a cross-border basis.
And what we see is many large EU financial services firms, particularly I would say in the market infrastructure space, are now facing very different supervisors. They are basically based in 5, 6, 7, 8 different countries in some shape or form. And there, the problem of having slightly inconsistent approaches, slightly different views, sometimes contradictory demands from the supervisors is just not working in practice. And it's making the life of the entities themselves, but also the life of us as supervisors, incredibly complex and inefficient. So from that perspective, I think this Board of Supervisors has agreed that we need to move forward, and ESMA has argued that we should look, for example, at market infrastructure players. CCPs, Stephen already mentioned. I personally believe CSDs fall into that same category, particularly for the big ICSDs, stock exchanges. But I think we also need to recognize, and again, Robert quoted it, it's also about making sure that we actually reduce the risk to investors in the home host context. So I think there's also the need to look more broadly at those issues, and there it is clear that we have a good example, for example, in MiCA, and that is why that was also quoted in the ESMA report. It was decided to set up digital asset, crypto asset regulation on a national basis. That means with MiCA coming into force at the end of last year, basically each of the 27 supervisors now has to build up their own crypto asset supervision, work out how they do market surveillance, make sure that they actually authorize these entities who are big global players who don't want to be regulated, who are looking for the easiest way into the EU. And wherever they come in, they then have the right to do the business across the EU. Why did we do that? It certainly is creating a lot of additional work and complexity for us to try to ensure that we have a level playing field, that all the supervisors look at this in the same way. So, from my perspective, not surprisingly, I would argue this is the time to make the extra step forward. And we need to make sure that we look at how we can do that in the best way and reduce the overcomplexity and the fragmentation that we still have. So from our perspective, market infrastructure, some of the digital services, but also, as you rightly say, we could look at further enhancing some of the supervisory convergence measures where we're not going to go probably at this point to the European SEC, but where supervision will remain national and where we need to make sure that we continue to push also our common supervisory goals.
Okay, many thanks. Verena, I turn to the think tanks, and first to Johannes. Johannes, you had also a policy brief on this topic. I quote the title because it's interesting. Capital Markets Union, Europe must stop beating around the bush. So you advocate in this policy brief for greater centralization of capital market supervisions, but you didn't enter into the details to what you had in mind, if I quote also this policy brief, there is a great controversy over whether stock exchanges, asset managers, EU CCPs or payment service providers should be the next to have centralized supervision. You didn't take any position on that.
So thank you very much. It's great to be here. And it's funny for me because normally when I speak in Berlin, my role is to make many of the arguments that you put forward in your excellent report. And so I'm the voice of ambition. Now here I feel, being in Paris, being in this panel, I want to be the voice of Berlin. And the voice of Berlin is actually not ambition. So I pour a bit of water into the wine, and the excellent wine that we've been served by you, and give you a bit of the arguments that are, I think, important questions that we need to keep in mind. The first point, I think it's very important to see and we can discuss this further, to what extent really supervisory centralization can be the trailblazer, sort of the one instrument that can push and sort of bring the other measures with it. I think it's important to see this in tandem with a convergence and further harmonization, both on the regulatory side, on the national law side, on tax, and other measures to boost capital markets. So singling out supervisory centralization as the sort of key lever is probably too ambitious and probably also not realistic. So you need to see it in the full tandem. The second, and I'm echoing what Stephen has said, there are three dimensions of why we are discussing supervisory centralization and why we are discussing the saving and investment union. One is stability, the other one is integration, and the third is development. So deepening the capital markets, integrating them, and making them safe. And often the discussion on supervisory centralization is about stability. But what we are actually hoping for by centralizing supervision more is to actually push integration and increase development. But if you then look at our experience in supervisory centralization, the SSM, and Stephen, you mentioned it, there has been a very positive effect on stability with the creation of the SSM, and this was one of the key motivation of why giving the ECB supervisory powers. But in terms of the level of price and quality-based integration, and you look at the ECB reports, actually we have not made much progress. There was the hope, and I remember some of the discussions we had, Benoit, when the ECB was given the power, is that there would be a big jump in cross-border mergers, and there would be a convergence in banking models. Both has not happened. So in a way, we need to ask ourselves, are we hopeful that with institutional centralization, we can get this important push on integrating markets further and then deepen their development? And of course, the second point that's often made, because you've alluded to the SEC, is that the SEC was created in 1923 after the big wave of capital markets deepening. So also in the US, I mean, the SEC played an important role as a catalyst, but some of the big developments were actually market-driven and not so much driven by a central supervisor. Now, you ask, can I be a bit more outspoken in terms of what is my precise prediction than what we did put in the policy brief? And keeping in mind the discussions that I had in Berlin, I think, and it's not so surprising, kind of echoing what Stephen and Verena has said, I think the space of CCPs and ICSDs or CSDs is probably the most promising one. We should not underestimate the link to the argument on the resolution framework, and in particular central bank access to central bank liquidity. I think that's one of the elements that need to be addressed as well. But I think this would be the space that I see most promising in terms of pushing it further. You have a Stability Act, and there is some sort of opening politically on this. And I stop here.
Okay, Johannes. So, Niklas, you need a mic. Yes. So you also have think a lot about this issue. You have also advocated for the governance, for a change in the governance in ESMA, which will be linked to the extension of the power, and you also have mentioned, and you are the only one I think to have mentioned audit firms as institutions that deserve direct supervision at EU level. So perhaps you could elaborate on your views on these issues. And at the end of, we will perhaps jump directly to another issue, because the SSM has been mentioned, and you have clearly looked very closely at the SSM, how it works, what the pros and cons, what's that. So perhaps you could also introduce the lessons. The lessons we can draw from the supervision of banks for the supervision of capital markets. But first, what's your assessment for the supervision of capital markets themselves?
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. In good time-honored fashion, I will start with disclosures. Even though I'm not a public official, I could have conflicts of interest. So I'm an independent non-executive board member at the trade repository arm of DTCC, one of the entities of which is supervised by ESMA directly. I also am the brother of a venture capital fund manager. I have all my savings in his fund, so you know where I come from. But I don't think these are conflicts. I really speak as a policy analyst today. And as you mentioned, Robert, and thank you for that, I was a witness both to the creation of the SSM and also importantly to the creation of FAMLA. I remember a meeting in this room where it was discussed 3 years ago or so. And what that taught me, I mean, banking supervision and capital market supervision are very different. So I think it's a mistake to try to copy-paste what has been done with the SSM on the experience of capital markets. However, what I took away from those experiences, both of them, is that people tell you it's impossible, it's national sovereignty, it will never happen. And then it happens. I have a vivid recollection of a conversation here in Paris with a senior official, a private conversation, 6 months before the decision to create the SSM. It was late 2011 or early 2012. And that person told me, you know, banking supervision, yeah, you're right. I mean, in theory, we would need, you know, European banking supervision, but it's national sovereignty. So it won't happen. Don't waste your time. 6 months later, France was in the leading role of making European banking supervision happen. So I think it's important to remember that history. What I want to say first and foremost is that what now, especially now that it's available in English, what is now known as the Ophel report is a really important contribution to the debate. And I want to congratulate Robert, but also Pervenche and the AEFR for making it happen. I would say it's the best quality.
There are many contributors.
Yes, but
many of them
but you're the
in the room.
You're the author, and so you deserve the credit. And I want to say, I think it's the most in depth of those reports. With all due respect to L'État noyé, Draghi, and more, it is really, it goes into the stuff that matters, and it also makes a very constructive, I would even say heroic attempt to explore that key question of the boundaries between national and European in an integrated, in a kind of steady state framework. I would say, I'm not sure you would agree with that, Robert, that by making that attempt, it demonstrates that it's an impossible task. But I think it's very important to have tried it. So I won't elaborate on the reason why I think, in a way, generally with Johannes, we agree on almost everything. Here it will be a kind of show of contrast. So I will kind of disagree on everything he said, but just for the sake of conversation. I won't elaborate for lack of time on why supervision is so central. I will only say that supervision shapes markets, even so it doesn't create markets. And I think there are good reasons why it could be more directly catalytic in terms of market integrations than even the SSM was in terms of banking. The short reason for that is that there is a financial safety net for banks that generally doesn't exist for capital markets. There are a few things we can discuss about CCPs, but at the end of the day, they're very peripheral. Now, when you think of supervisory integration, I think it's important to think in terms of the steady state. I mean, there is no such thing, but still some things that could provide some stability institutionally. And here it becomes tricky. Because actually, I think every single report we've been talking about, including Robert, suggests the scope of ESMA should be expanded. So we have a bigger, more powerful ESMA with direct authority over more market segments. I think when you think about it, that means the governance has to be completely re-engineered so that ESMA is able to make its own independent decisions. And here we now have templates in the EU for that kind of organizations. The two I would mention is AMLA, of course, but also the Single Resolution Board. Now, if ESMA is more independent, That means that, and it has these more direct supervisory duties. That means we have to rethink the relationship between ESMA and the NCAs, the national competent authorities, in a pretty holistic way. And what that leads you to is that ESMA cannot be entirely in Paris. And I know this is controversial in this town, but ESMA needs local sensitivity, needs local knowledge, which currently it cannot have because it's in one place. Now, I know that EU agencies so far have been always in one place. But there is nothing in EU law that tells you that an EU agency cannot have local offices. And I think this expanded ESMA will absolutely need local offices. Now that creates a question of efficiency and value for money. If you have duplication between national competent authorities and local offices of ESMA, that's very inefficient. And I think where that leads you, frankly, is to a completely different design from the one we have now. And in a way, I've become more radical in that debate compared to the contributions you mentioned of Robert a year or so ago. I think we need to move, at the end of the day, to a framework where ESMA is a multi-centric distributed authority that has local knowledge and local connectivity. But basically, and I'm sorry to say things that sound too radical, replace the national competent authorities. So now, that's a different design from banking and AML, and that's for a reason, because capital market supervision is different from banking and AML. So let me conclude. That's a political decision, of course. It's a discussion for the heads of state and government. So was banking union. Banking union was a discussion of the heads in state and government. So when you look at the deadlock in ECOFIN, that's no guide for the discussion we're having, because it's not a discussion of finance ministers. And I think that point is very important if you want to assess the political feasibility. You know that the theme in Brussels now is simplification, reducing the burden of business. We have a completely unseemly halfway house in capital markets. It's not the case that it's national with ESMA coordination. It's a coexistence of the European and national level. This is too complicated. So the political choice is whether you move from that unwieldy halfway house to a better halfway house, or whether you really simplify and make life easier for market participants. Thank you.
Thank you for this rather radical proposal. It's not a step-by-step approach. If I perhaps you can react on that first, and especially Stephen, because you are also a member of the SSM Supervisory Board. So both on this comparison with banking supervision and the proposal by Nicolas of a new organization, how do you react on that?
Well, interesting. I think so I completely agree on the need to have also local knowledge, but that is the current SSM model. So in the current SSM model, you have local offices to some extent. It's not the way we describe them, but the way it works is if you look at the supervisory capacity of the SSM, basically 80% of the workforce is at national level, and 20% is in Frankfurt. And so, and even if you look at the LSIs, the smaller banks with the balance sheets which are below 30 billion, they are done completely at national level. There's more convergence, and so it is presented as a radical idea, but to some extent you could see the same model, for example, applied to trading venues, where you take the capacity of the current NCAs and you would have a stronger capacity to centrally coordinate, and the ultimate decision making would be at European level. And so in that sense, I find the description radical, but in essence, I think it's the SSM model. Maybe to also react to a few other points that were made. First of all, on the point by Johannes Wie and the Berlin voice in terms of we need to move in tandem. The reality, of course, is supervision is now lagging behind the real markets, and also lagging behind the regulation. So we have progressed very significantly on regulation with going to regulations rather than directives. Markets are much more integrated, and so yes, we need to move in tandem, and supervision is the one that is lagging. I think interestingly, and to some extent it is, why has centralization in banking been difficult? Because indeed, it's true that when I started in 2011 as a chair, at that point it was not conceivable that there would be central supervision of banking. One of the real barriers to move is obviously everything around resolution, and that at the end of the day, national governments need to pay the bill when there would be a banking failure, and so moving there in
deposit guarantee, non-deposit guarantee.
So the deposit guarantee combined with resolution was very important. That is much. There are some areas in financial markets where this plays a role, but it's much less prominent. And so, to some extent, moving to central supervision would be easier. And the other reason is also the public has very strong views on banks. So for a politician, arguing for central supervision for banks is a difficult issue, because the general public has views and strong emotional feelings around banks. They have that much less around CCPs, around trading venues, etc. And so to some extent it's been a surprise why we haven't moved there. Probably it's indeed, it's the there is the sad observation is that we typically move when there's been a big accident, and then we move. Finally, I should say two more things. First, MiCA, I completely agree with Verena. I think that has been, so in general, we have been now quite critical in the sense of we need to move to more central supervision. In reality, what has been achieved in the past, 14 years, has been still very good, very important, also in terms of convergence. I think also the 2019 reform has really improved in terms of the consistency between national supervision, also increasing the level of supervision, so we shouldn't discard what has been achieved. I think MiCA is kind of a step back. The fact that that you embed regulatory competition by giving third country parties the choice where to locate is really embedding the risk of weaker supervision. And then finally, I just realized I didn't really answer to your question around step by step. That is the way we do things in Europe, but clearly we should move on CCPs, trading venues, investment firms, and then take it from there.
Jana?
Yes, so first of all, I think I really like the kind of focusing on why are we trying to do something here. I mean, it is about a fragmented market where we still have significant barriers to having the single European market that we need to move forward. And also in the whole dynamics of simplification. I think it's a very important point. What we have at the moment is extremely complex. And so we need to find ways to make it simpler and more efficient. And here I agree with Stephen, actually supervision is lagging behind some of what the markets are already doing. And in particular, actually where players want to integrate, the current structure makes it expensive and difficult to do so. And that's also why some of the market players are now coming around to the point, actually, having a single supervisor for my business would actually make it easier for me to realize some of the scale and efficiencies that I need to operate, which is so important for the competitiveness of the European markets. Then I want to fully support what Nicolas said about banking and capital market supervision are very different. And I think others have mentioned some of the differences. So I think we need to find the model that works in the capital markets complex. And that, to my mind, is also step by step. I think it's important to look at where does it make sense to move to Central European supervision now and where does it not make sense. And I think it's right to make a distinction. Sometimes the comparison of the EU SEC, it's very flattering and it's great to hear and it's nice to have that support. But on the other hand, it's also unrealistic probably to move across everything to a European SEC framework. So we need to look at where it makes sense. And then finally, I wanted to comment briefly on the governance point. So first of all, Nicolas, I very much disagree insofar that ESMA is a truly European authority. It's a truly European body. We happen to be based in Paris, but we could be based in in Zagreb, we could be based in Amsterdam for that matter, we could be based anywhere. So we have staff from over 25 countries, we have a genuine European body, so I think it's important that we find a governance mechanism, and as you rightly say, that will be for the politicians to decide what the right governance mechanism is. But for me, what is important is that it ensures effective decision-making, and actually on the supervision side, I have to say the ESMA governance and decision-making works extremely efficiently. So just for those who are not day-to-day with us, it actually functions. On top of that, I think I would say I'm not against changes to that. I think if that's what the politicians decide, perfectly fine. We can operate in different governance models, but let's make it commensurate to what we are trying to achieve as well. We are not, and we're probably not tomorrow going to be the SSM. We are not going to be a body with thousands of people at the ESMA office. We will continue to have to work with the national supervisors with some of that expertise, and that is also rightly so, because it is important that we bring that national experience and that expertise into the genuine European supervision and decision-making, and I think that is important to do.
So I think we're in the midst of the politics of this question of whether do we move forward. And had we heard Enrico Letta, he would have explained to you the two drivers of why we are different in the current situations is that we really need to finance the twin transition of digitalization and greening the economy. And his view is that the two kind of classes of actors that would support this very much, the change, is on the one hand national politicians that see we won't have the public money, so we need to activate the private money, and companies that are looking for the savings not to go out of Europe, but to be a channel towards them. Now, the question is, what does it need to these two actors to really be ambitious in the and be radical as Nicola and we all want them to be? And I think there are a couple of points that are important to keep in mind. National politicians are risk averse, and I think they will only kind of let go of their national solutions if they think that the European solution is superior. So I think one important issue is the trust in European solutions, and there I think we are core in the realm of governance. So how can the kind of governance of that European solution look like that you would instill trust? In the SSM case, I mean, there was a bit of a credit that was given by giving it to the ECB. So you had already an institution that had credibility and trust, and so it was a bit easier in a way to give it to you. And here I would say, and that's not a particular criticism to ESMA as such, but I think there is room to improvement. And I mean, again, being a bit of the translator from Berlin, the fact that it is here in France and it's in Paris, in a way, sometimes it's seen, this is the voice of the French, or this is captured by certain interests. I'm not saying that this is right. I'm just sort of reporting that there's sometimes the impression we're not yet there in the way it's structured, to instill the full trust. And I think there it's important to demonstrate that the leap forward is one that does not only instill trust, but it also brings simplification. And this brings me to this other group of actors. I think it's true that increasingly companies are saying, or entities are saying, we actually want European solutions. But there are also still a large part of supervised entities that are here saying, well, the national supervisor is at least the devil I know. And so if you can make the case that by moving up to the European level, you really bring in the issue of simplification, and you can hijack in a way this big wave that's now all about competitiveness and simplification by saying this is what European solutions really provide, is a reduced complexity. I think that's an avenue that's important. And let me make a final last point, and I've mentioned Paris, Berlin a couple of times already now. I should have mentioned Dublin as well as Luxembourg. Of course, underlying a bit the elephant in the room is also how many financial centers do we need? What kind of specialization, division of labor between the financial centers exist, and how does that architecture in a way translate further down the road towards a sort of supervisory architecture? And some of the resistance we see, of course, is for those that feel that they would lose out in this race of financial centers, and they'd rather have the current rents preserved. How do we usually solve this in a European way is you create big packages. So you combine different dossiers and say, okay, the winners of a leap forward somehow compensate the losers. And so the key questions is how big the package could be, what do we put in that package, and do we have the leadership to lead this? And here, of course, yeah, we need to see, at least in one country, there is elections in next month. And maybe that will invigorate the debate from their side and the leadership from their side. But I would hope, of course, that also on the French side, in a way, there could be sort of an invigoration of the Franco-German engine, because you need to you need that leadership beyond the Commission to create that package.
Nicolas from Brussels, how do you see that?
Well, I make a French comment. I think the good news is we have a little bit more leadership and political stability in this country than we had a week ago, so that's good news. Anyway, that's not our topic today. Well, I'm reconciled now with my friend Johannes, because I agree with every single bit of what he just said. And also one thing I didn't mention before is that I think his kind of triptych of aims of stability, integration, and development is a very good way to think about the capital markets union, savings and investment union agenda. So that's very helpful. On this thing between the French and German perceptions, I mean, as usual, there's a bit of a dialogue of the deaf, and speaking at cross purposes. So the Germans are right to have the perceptions that you mentioned, the fear of over-centralization and a kind of slightly mercantilist impulse. Conversely, there's an understandable perception here that the Frankfurt got the ECB, it got the SSM, now it got AMLA, and now you're talking about basically distributing the only things that Paris has, which is ESMA, all respect to the EBA, and essentially, relocating some of it to Amsterdam or elsewhere. So that's an understandable perception. I think at the same time, there are trade-offs here, and of course, in the proposal I outlined, which will be described more in depth in the forthcoming paper. The headquarters would remain in Paris, and that's important. So France doesn't lose what it has in many ways. On the politics, just two things quickly. One is, people say the ESA's review in 2017 showed that this is impossible. Look at what happened, and I'm sure Martin Merlin here remembers that, and many others who were involved in that story. I would connect that to what Johannes just said, which is really important about Dublin, but particularly Luxembourg. We know that the ESA's reviews ended up in a big fiasco, because in a way there was a front of opposition that coalesced around with many member states. I think, is this a public meeting or it's a broadcast? I don't know. Yes. Well, so I will put that in diplomatic terms. I think everybody recognized the wonderful leadership of Luxembourg in that discussion, but I think it was a much broader coalition of member states which basically voided the proposal of the Commission. And from that matter, I think if we look back at that experience, there were not strategic, but tactical mistakes in the proposal, because that allowed this coalition of opposition to form way beyond the very limited number of member states who were determined to kill the proposal on matters of principle. And I think there are lessons to learn from that experience in terms of adjusting the level of ambition, frankly, having it an ESA's review as opposed to an ESMA review. And my suggestion, certainly for the next round of that kind of discussion, would not to bundle ESMA with EIOPA and EBA. Final point on the parallels with the SSM, and you mentioned that, Stephen. I will state the obvious at the risk of being slightly obnoxious. The treaty guarantees that national central banks are independent. And we can discuss how that's implemented, but by and large, that is implemented. This is an enforceable treaty provision. We don't have that for capital market supervisors. It's a fact. Actually, there is a body of literature that demonstrates that not in the smallest member states, even in some pretty large ones, the capital market supervisor is not independent at all by institutional design from the political authorities. I'm not talking about France here, but you know, there are other significant member states. Also, and that's already been mentioned, there are vast swaths of what we're talking about in terms of segments that are subject to supervisory mandates, where a number of member states simply have no activity. So the NCA doesn't know what it's about. It doesn't have experience. It doesn't have knowledge. That's in contrast to banks and also AML, because even so, you know, there are vast differences in terms of magnitude. Every member state has banks. Every member state has, I wouldn't say money laundering, but the risk of it. And therefore, there is a common experience that is just not there in many of the market segments we're talking about. And that's one of the key reasons why, in addition to the point that you mentioned about political salience, you know, in every country, citizens know about banks in a way they don't necessarily know about trade repositories. But I think this asymmetry, this structural asymmetry, and very importantly, the lack of independence of some NCAs, means that you cannot have the same design for capital market supervision as you have for the SSM. Sorry for being a bit long.
So, many thanks. If we do not want to repeat the errors made during the 2019 review of ESAs, you mentioned that to some extent we should just focus on capital markets, not treat them at the same time with EBA and IOPA. Stephen, you remember this time when the discussion was at that time very hot, but how do we want to reform the ESAs? And at that time, the consequences were relatively limited, I should say, vis-à-vis direct supervision by ESMA or IOPA or what. How do you assess the lessons drawn from this time for the future? And why will it be different in the next few quarters than it used to be in 2019?
No, I would agree with the point that if you would do another reform, you would try to do it and focus on capital markets and then by implication on ESMA, because I think it makes the argument for change more difficult. And so I could see that, and also considering the current political momentum, at least around capital markets, saving investments union, would give indeed the argument to try there to focus on ESMA. I'm not as negative because I think, if I remember well, you called it, I think, a fiasco, the reform. That is quite harsh wording. There's been improvements. I valued very much at that time as a chair the improvements, for example, regarding the peer reviews. I think I've been. I think the Wirecard peer review, or the implications of Wirecard and to what extent was the relevant NCA looking appropriately at financial reporting, I think was a strong peer review, and I've been proud of the outcome that we did there. And still, so I think it is, I wouldn't call it a fiasco, not at all. I think it's been incremental, but it's not been fundamental. And even, you know, if it is obviously, as you will have heard, I would be for more fundamental steps, but in addition, even these incremental ones help. I understand, I saw the beginning also of the supervisory priorities, where you coordinate your focus, your supervisory priorities across NCAs, and even that has a good value. So I wouldn't be so negative on that one. Maybe 2 or 3 more remarks. I think the interesting thing around, indeed, independence of the ECB is better protected in the treaty. That's the obvious statement. But to be fair, independence of NCAs in securities markets is also more problematic than NCA independence, central bank independence at national level. And so, for example, I could see as a board, as a chair of the board, that the turnover of members was higher than in central banking, because if the new government didn't like or wanted to have a different direction from their supervisors, they ended up typically at the securities regulator and not at the central bank.
That's the US case.
Sorry?
You are describing the US case.
But I also saw it around the board at ESMA, that you saw, I wouldn't name the individual countries, but I've seen a number of countries where the national supervisors, the securities market supervisor was changed because of a change in government. And so, and to some extent, I think one of the strengths, and going to the SSM, one of the strengths of the SSM has been the independence. The fact that you have now the power as SSM to supervise 100+ banks makes you simply more, more powerful vis-a-vis that individual entity than as a national banking supervisor with having 5, 10 large banks. And so if there are concerns about independence in the case of securities markets at national level, that could to some extent even be an argument to bring it to the central level, because I think that would even improve. Secondly, I'm a fan of the ESMA governance and the SSM governance. I consider them to be in the same continuum, in the sense you could move more in the direction of the SSM with having a number of more votes by, let's say, the European voices, as you have in the case of the SSM, where there are 6 board members that are appointed, let's say, at the European level. I think it's important to have that voice of the NCAs, and to some extent, I think ultimately my preference would be more with, let's say, SSM vis-a-vis the SRB, because ultimately, also for European institutions, it's so important to have the connection with the national level in terms of accountability, in terms of visibility, and therefore I'm a fan, let's say, of ESMA, SSM, but I consider them still similar, although with different different weights. In the essence, I consider them still very similar. Final, and then I will stop. Yes, the SSM has been very strong on stability, improving NPLs or reducing non-performing loans, increasing capital levels of European banks. I think it's really been impressive what the SSM has achieved. There has been an increase even there on cross-border activity. For example, a Dutch bank, LeasePlan bank, a sizable bank, has become part of Société Générale. We feel completely happy about that. About such type of movements. And so it's indeed, there hasn't been the fundamental change as we expected, but there's been some incremental change there of more integration.
Step by step. Last word, Johannes, and then last word for Verena.
So I think what is important in the comparison with the SSM is that there was a clear allocation of responsibility. So the significant and the less significant. So for the responsibility for the significant institution, it's very clear that the ECB takes the decision. And so I think there, and then for that, especially at the first 10 years of the SSM, they have not looked so much into the less significant institutions. So that clear hold over the central kind of banking groups is, I think, very important. At the same, and there was an executive decision capacity of the board that has a strong chair. It has the additional European members and so on. So there is a capacity to take tough decisions that is, I think, is very important. At the same time, and here some disagreement, I think I'm totally with Stephen and less so with Nicolas on the role of NCAs into the national context, into the national debate. And in fact, the SSM also shows it can work. I mean, the JSTs, I would say, are examples of where surprisingly the cacophony of different contracts, even different hierarchies, where quite a number of people within the central banks were rather skeptical whether that worked. I think overall the JST has worked well. Just one last point in terms of trust. I think I totally buy the discussion that we had about the difference between banking and capital markets. But I touched upon it very briefly in the context of CCPs, but the issue of what is the fiscal framework, I think is still relevant. And so a bit the question of do we have, I mean, what do we have as a sort of floor when there are fiscal responsibilities? I think it's much less pressing for capital markets, but I think we still need to think it with, because that's often an argument that is put forward by national politicians. Yeah, if shit hits the fan, as the English say, we have to foot the bill as national politicians. So I think, I know there is a difference to banking, but I think we need to think that with.
So.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I wanted to just briefly say that I agree with Stephen. Actually, the ESA's review has brought some benefits in terms of further driving some of the convergence powers of ESMA. And also, for example, one of the things that we see day to day is the common willingness of the national authorities to focus on the highest risk at European level in a similar way, making sure we supervise through common supervisory actions and that we focus on similar high-level risks across Europe. So I think there are some advantages that have come through that. But clearly, to make the next step for the European capital markets, I think we need to be more ambitious and need to make a step forward. I also wanted, on the point of trust, credibility, independence, can I just emphasize that ESMA, I think, and I believe, maybe not as visible as the SSM, but ESMA is a direct supervisor. I think we have built the credibility of being able to supervise in an independent and expert way the entities that have been entrusted to us. And over time, that has grown, and it will grow further over the next years, including ESG ratings, third country benchmarks, and so on. And I think at that level also, we face face-to-face the other big international regulators. ESMA is now the counterpart that the SEC talks to, that the FCA talks to, and I think it also presents Europe as a far more united way if we can be that interface for the big global cross-border players that are effective in markets. Finally, I wanted to say that I think I'm also a big supporter of, in the political space, of making sure that we strengthen capital markets across the EU. That means also strengthening the national markets. That also means strengthening the national supervisors. But that should not be at the expense of making Europe move forward and having a genuine single market that has no barriers. And so from that perspective, I think it's extremely important that we now take this political ambition to the next step, that we make the European markets more efficient and more effective. And for that, to my mind, it is clear that we also need to look again, where does it make sense to have central European supervision to the benefit of the EU capital markets?
Okay, let us close the roundtable here. I think we are just on time. So improving trust in European authorities is to some extent a key driver of our ambition.
Okay, thank you very much. We are moving now to the second panel. My name is Fabrice de Marigny. I'm a partner at Forvis Mazars and chair of the European Capital Market Institute. And I have previously contributed to the creation of ESMA and injected some ideas, in particular changing names, of the Saving and Investment Union. I will be the moderator of this panel, and at the end try to draw some conclusions of the discussion, of course, of this panel and maybe some of the previous panel. The intention of this panel is really to focus the discussion after the discussion on the institutional and political relevance of an integrated securities market regulator, on the supervisory function itself and how the function of supervising a market or other activities in the Union can be calibrated to be the most efficient possible for that to be a contribution to the Savings and Investment Union and also for EU competitiveness. We are very fortunate to have the best possible panelists for this discussion and hopefully have a fruitful discussion based on real-life experience coming from very different perspectives. So we will start by Marianne Barbalayani, who is the chair of the French Financial Market Authorities, but also sitting, of course, in the supervisory board of ESMA that produced unanimously a paper showing a way forward. We have Benoît Queré, who has the double experience on how to organize supervision in the EU, both in your previous career at the ECB, and now as chair of the French Competition Authority, member of the EU network of national competition authorities. Klaus Lober, who is the chair of the ESMA CCPs, several times mentioned this morning, so for sure you will have comments to make. Carmine Di Noia, who was a national supervisor at Consob in Italy, and now Director for Financial and Enterprise Affairs at the OECD. And the voice of the industry, and Nicolas Calcount, who is the Deputy CEO of Amundi, and the first EU asset manager company of the single market. So to start with, Marianne, maybe you can give your perspective on this discussion.
Thank you very much, Fabrice. Thank you, Pervenche, for inviting me and Robert for designing this wonderful report that is a good basis for our discussion. So, is integrated supervision a success factor for the Savings and Investment Union and EU competitiveness? The answer is very easy there, because everybody has given the answer already, and it's yes. So I think we should look at three aspects, really. First of all, why we need to have EU supervision, then why don't we have it? If it's so obvious we need it, why don't we have it? And last but not least, what is the good way to achieve it? And is the SEC the right model? Which are questions that have been already addressed by the first roundtable and also by Robert in his excellent address, introductory address. But let me reflect on this from my perspective. I'm currently the chair of the French market regulator. I'm a member of the board of ESMA, as was mentioned. I also have an experience in the private sector and also in politics, since I had the great chance to be with the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister during the sovereign debt crisis, where I learned a lot on the reasons why we need to have more European supervision for many reasons. So first of all, why we need European supervision? Financial stability has been mentioned. It's the obvious case. It's completely inefficient to have separate national supervisors facing global entities, or at least entities that have cross-border activities. It's been said, and I think, and I will come back to that, that the best example of this is large crypto asset platforms. With the MiCA regulation, the EU, and Verena mentioned it, it's a very clear and obvious case, and probably, by the way, an interesting first and not too difficult step if we want to progress in that area. Supervision of large global crypto asset platforms that will have a cross-border activity is an obvious case where, for reasons of efficiency and also investors' protection, it would be very urgent, it is very urgent, to switch from a situation where each national supervisor will have to build their own capacity in a full dilemma of the prisoner, where we are going each to have part of the picture, but none of us is going to have a global picture. So that is, to me, the most obvious case, and probably a one that can be easily fixed politically, and I will come back to that. So financial stability is obvious, and the criteria for transferring more supervision to European supervisors have been made. Let's not forget investors' protection. It's been mentioned, but less so. And obviously, investors' protection is also a major driver. Why it is so? Well, good news is cross-border activity of financial players is developing in the EU. But it has also bad consequences in terms of bad products that are distributed in the EU with poor initial check on the quality of the products. And we see that on a daily basis at the French IMF, where we receive direct complaints from investors, much of it, or a lot of it, linked to products that have been licensed or authorized elsewhere than on our territory. So cross-border activity is desirable, it's needed if we want a good market, but currently, with the current supervisory setting, it can be dysfunctional, and we have very clear and developing examples. Last but not least, private sector interests. So Nicola will probably develop that, and I will not insist on that. And the fourth reason, and maybe that's a good argument for Berlin, Johannes, simplification. To be blunt, there will never be real simplification of the financial regulatory framework and texts if we don't have a stronger European supervision. The reason for that is very simple. There is not enough trust, there is not enough supervisory convergence, and all NCAs are faced with, like I mentioned, a high level of complaints from national investors who are in trouble because of products that have been agreed, authorized, licensed, or players that have been licensed or authorized elsewhere. So this is really a suboptimal situation. And the reason why we have very complex texts, very complex directives, very complex level 2 texts is that because of this lack of supervisory convergence, and Verena said it, the tools we have are efficient, more or less so, but not enough. And we don't achieve supervisory convergence at this stage. So the only way we can protect ourselves and protect our investors from the downward effects of that situation is to have very, very, very detailed texts, because it's the only way you can try and achieve some form of protection or a good level of protection for investors, and even that is not working. So that's really, and I think in Berlin everybody is very preoccupied for good reasons with red tape, cutting red tape, and simplifying, and that is now on top of the agenda of the European institutions. So let us be clear. If there is no progress in European supervision, it will be very difficult to achieve, because we will all the time need more detailed text to make sure that there is no divergence and no outlier in the supervisory framework. Then why don't we have it? Because it's so obvious. Well, the answer is very clear. It's political, and so far we haven't had enough political drive for that. So, do we need a financial crisis? I hope not. But that is one of the reasons why the banking union was made. So let's hope we can use just our intellectual approach of the subject, and we don't need an approach in times of crisis. So that's my first message, but I hope we can achieve it. as was underlined by the Draghi report and the Letta reports, we don't have a violent crisis, but we have a silent crisis. The silent crisis is the decline of European economies and the lack of financial strength to have higher developments in our economy and face the double transition that we need to finance. So political problems, yes, we don't start from scratch, Nicolas, I'm sorry to say that. We don't start from a blank sheet, we start from something, and something is national competent authorities have important powers and have a past and have an imprint on the political setting in each country. And then ESMA has developed. ESMA is in some too limited area a supervisor, but is not central in supervision. All NCAs have stronger supervisory powers than ESMA has on more important players. So that leads me to the third question, which is the SEC the model, which is the question that we have today? Well, first of all, let us remind, well, unfortunately, there's nobody from the SEC to describe the SEC system here. But first of all, let's remind everybody that there is not a complete unified market supervisory setting, even in the US, because there is the SEC, but also the CFTC. And they share the supervision in some areas. The CFTC is also competent, and the things that we see here in Europe with some form of competition between regulators also exist in the US. That being said, obviously, it's an interesting model, but it will be very difficult to have this in the EU because the SEC model somehow is what Nicolas is advocating for, which is just cancelling what has been done over the last decades, building national supervisors with competence, especially in supervision, and creating a supervisor that at European level that would be competent everywhere with offices, if I understand well, which is the case of the SEC, in all European countries. Well, that's an option. I doubt that it could work, and it would also be completely sub-efficient because national authorities have developed competencies. So the SSM is also a model. Is it adequate for market regulations? That's a question. I don't have time to develop that now. But I think one of the problems with the SSM as a model, and maybe Nicolas will develop that, I don't know, is that there is some form of SSM hangover in the industry. Because like I said, we need political push to develop a European supervision, but we also need push from the industry, which was very strong when the SSM was conceived and achieved and created. I see less of that, to be frank, now in the banking sector, which I'm very familiar with, as I come from the banking sector. But, well, let's hope that we find our own way, which is probably a third way, and we can obviously discuss that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marianne, for this testimony of real life and how you see things progressing. Maybe to enrich the perspectives on how an EU supervision can be organized, I give you the floor, Benoit, with your twin experience.
Not sure it works. Yes, can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much, Fabrice, and thank you to the AEFR for having me here, and let me double down on the praise to Robert for his paper, which sets the stage in a really very nice way and very compelling way. I'm very happy that the discussion on capital market union has restarted. I left the ECB at the end of 2019, I guess, very frustrated. With the discussion on both banking union and CMU. I spent nights in Brussels with Johannes negotiating banking union, and basically nothing was happening. and CMU wasn't even being discussed at all at the time, or not in a significant way. And it was not only it was not even lack of appetite and incentives for member states. It was disingenuity. I mean, they were claiming that they were doing it, but actually nothing was happening. So it's very brave actually to restart that discussion, and let's see if it works. But then we have to, as a group, we really have to find the right argument that will impress on politicians. I think that's what the discussion is about today. I'd like to make two separate points. One short point about the macro dimension of CMU, because I think it misses a little bit in the discussion, and then I will elaborate more on the governance models, as Fabrice invites me to do. On the macro, I wanted to bring back the macro dimension of CMU, because this is not only about making life easier for issuers, investors, and supervisors. It's about Europe's growth and stability. If we had a chance to listen to Enrico Letta, as you had said, that's certainly what he would have said. But that matters for the design of CMU, in the sense that if this is about raising Europe's investment and possibly even consumption also, then this should have an impact on the kind of pan-European instruments that we want to introduce and on the kind of purpose of the whole project. I was interested last December when Mario Draghi came to Paris to give a speech at the CEPR conference, and he kind of tilted the whole discussion towards the macro side, while his whole report is about the macro side by and large, and he came to Paris saying, well, it's all about macro. It's mostly macro, as they would say in Washington. It's not mostly fiscal. Well, it's actually, I think he believes it's mostly fiscal, but he couldn't dare say it that way. So he said it's mostly macro. And he said that's because of lack of investment and consumption and bad macro policies, basically. And so the question from an economic standpoint is really whether Europe's external imbalances are the source or the consequence of lack of investment and consumption. And then you can take it the bottom up or top down, and at the end, of course, it's the same discussion, but it's not the same instruments. And so if we want to keep that macro perspective in the discussion, we've got to make sure that Capital Market Union delivers consumption and investment. So actually, it's not at all about savings. Sorry, Fabrice. It's not about savings. It's about investment. We don't care that much about savings. It's about making sure that savings turn into investment and consumption. And the good news is that that's a narrative that can reconcile Paris and Berlin, because both capitals, in both countries, the economy is now driven by public expenditures. And so in both countries, the two largest economies, there is a need to switch from public expenditures to private expenditures. And CMU can help engineer this expenditure switch from public expenditures to private expenditures that Europe very badly needs. So let's keep that in mind also. Now moving to CMU governance, or to the supervisory models, I think it's clear from what we've heard so far that CMU will have its own model. It cannot be exactly like the SSM. It cannot be like it is today. I mean, we've heard that. And so if we want to find the right model, we have to start from a broad diversity of possible supervisory models, and then maybe blend them in a way that suits the purpose. And I think we've also heard very compelling arguments in favor of having a strong center. And that's about, I mean, everything has been said about that. That's about being able to supervise groups. That's about financial stability, and maybe adding a word that hasn't been pronounced so far, that's about bringing in the macro-prudential dimension also in capital market supervision, which I think should be also an important objective of the design that we are discussing today. And I think it's Verena who said it. I think it's very important. It's about making Europe being able to speak with a single voice to the US and to the UK and to China. And that's always been there, but now with, since yesterday in a way, it's getting even more important that we need this single point of entry into Europe. So we need a strong center. We've heard that SSM was kind of maybe the best model. I mean, well, Nicolas disagreed, of course, but that was the kind of prevailing view in the discussion so far. Yes, the SSM has been an impressive success in terms of making bank supervision tougher and more credible, of course. But we also have the lessons we also have to learn the lessons of what hasn't worked so well with the SSM. The SSM hasn't. That's Johannes who said that hasn't. Contributed much to integrating the European banking industry and to incentivizing cross-border mergers. That was one initial purpose. That hasn't worked. And it's not the SSM fault. It's because of lack of a common safety net, lack of progress in deposit insurance, lack of progress in liquidity insurance and liquidity provision in crisis, and lack of trust generally in Europe, which of course none of us can mend today. So it's not their fault, but the SSM design hasn't helped fix that. The SSM is very costly because basically we've massively increased the number of supervisory staff in Europe. I remember one colleague from a national competent authority explaining me that they would have to hire lots of staff in that capital. I'm not giving the name of the capital because of supervision becoming single. And I asked, so why is that so? Well, because now we've got to have a view on Lithuanian banks and Cypriot banks, which wasn't the case so far. So we've got to hire staff to do that. So I often joked when I was at the ECB that SSM really deserved a box in the Harvard Business Review as the merger that has destroyed the most value in history in a way, because the synergies are massively negative, right? So let's learn about that. Marianne, you said that's going to help simplification. I think that's a good objective, but there is a very tangible risk that actually we end up with a system that is much more massive, with more staff and with more complexity, and that would collide with the objective that the higher level objective in the European Council and in the Commission of cutting red tape and simplifying. So I think we've got to learn from that. So what I've offered Robert in his report is also a comparison with what we have in competition, in antitrust, where we do have a European system where we have parallel enforcement by national authorities and by the Commission of a single rule book. That has worked very well. 90% of all decisions taken in Europe based on Article 101 and 102 of the treaty, which is, that's for competition people, but that's basically the competition part of the treaty. 90% of these decisions were taken at the national level, not at the Commission level, and that's my day job. It works well because there is a very strong single rule book with Regulation 1/2003 and the EU merger regulation. It works well because there are strong safeguards in terms of independence. That's a point that Nicolas made. It's very important. And you have a whole directive, the ECN Plus directive, which is about the safeguards that national competition authorities should have when they enforce EU law. And it has been implemented at a national level. And of course, there are limitations also. Not sure it works with a high-frequency supervision, like market supervision. Maybe it doesn't work because the transaction cost would be too high. It works because there is a long history of competition enforcement in Europe. Well, particularly in Germany, I have to say. Basically, everything we do has been imported either from Germany or from the US, to be honest. And that's a long history. But it works. And also, it works because there is a very strong treaty basis. Which of course is kind of wobbly for capital market union, if I may say so. So, but if you want to build your own model, you've got to blend the different properties of different models. So let's try to start from a broad range of possible models. Maybe my conclusion, Fabrice, is that this conference is about the SEC, or the title is about the SEC. As we know, SEC was created in 1934. The Fed was created in 1913, so that's 21 years. The ECB was created in 1998, and so 1998 plus 34, that's That's plus 31, sorry, that's 2019, so that discussion is really overdue.
Thank you, Benoit, for this optimism. Maybe we can move to you, Klaus. You are both in a regulatory authority, which is ESMA, but you personally are in charge of some aspects of supervisory function at EU level that was mentioned this morning, and your viewpoint is definitely a very valuable contribution to the discussion.
Thank you so much, and big thanks to AFR for having invited me here, and also my compliments to Robert and the report, I must say. It's intriguing to be here in this session, in particular having heard all the previous interventions and the high degree of convergence, in particular around the particularities of CCPs when it comes to looking at direct supervision. Looking at this degree of convergence of views, it's even more intriguing that there was an actual opportunity to establish fully direct supervision across EU CCPs, and in December the conclusion was this is not to be. Again, maybe interesting to reflect a bit about the particularities, but also to look a bit more widely, and I would to focus more specifically on the supervisory models and on the particular expertise and experience of ESMA in implementing forms of supervision. And again, I particularly appreciate some of the cross-references to the SSM, having spent also a part of my professional life at the ECB and having seen some of those discussions. The CCP Supervisory Committee that I chair clearly was inspired by some aspects of the SSM. Clearly what has not been transferred was the size of the resources that have been put in the SSM. We are at a fraction in ESMA in this field, but that is an aside. But I would like to pick up on a particular point that was made by Verena, and that is to stress ESMA is already a real supervisor. It is acting as a supervisor in a variety of fields with very specific approaches, depending on the particularities of the sector or the services being supervised. Actually, the first area of supervision is for credit rating agencies, which dates back to 2011, predating the SSM. So ESMA has been a direct supervisor for longer than what we have in the banking area with the SSM. And here, and I would like to bring a bit of more practical color, this long-standing experience has allowed ESMA to really focus with a particular emphasis in this case on conduct supervision, to get to know the entities, to be really in the knowledge of the activities, of how they evolve. And just to pick up a particular case, when we noticed that particularly ambitious credit rating agencies was expanding aggressively its business, driven by economic considerations and neglecting a bit the regulatory compliance, ESMA was able, because of this, to gradually step up the intensity of its supervision, to increase the engagements. And when we noticed that a fine actually failed, to step up with even more drastic measures such as unannounced inspections and targeted investigations that ultimately led to a change of the corporate culture. Again, this is something which is a very hands-on supervisory experience, but just very briefly to go beyond this, because we have acquired in ESMA further competence for trade repositories. In the context of the ESA review, this has been extended to the critical benchmarks and reporting data providers that have a cross-border dimension. And of course, we have in parallel also through EMIR 2.2 obtained not only a strong convergence, supervisory convergence role for EU CCPs, but the direct supervision, quite specifically, of two particularly systemic entities for the EU financial stability perspective, that is the two major UK CCPs. ESMA is acting as a direct supervisor in this respect and has built up in a very short period a significant supervisory experience. We had to build up this function in COVID and gather what is very specialized and rare knowledge in the markets, but within a very short period, we have been building up the expertise in a way that we are able to look eye to eye with Bank of England. And that is something which I must say is a compliment, a testament to my colleagues in this field, to work on something, establish not only processes, but build up specific expertise on risk modeling that now serves as a benchmark. We have probably a comparable degree of concentration of expertise here that you will find only at the level of the CFTC, which is our counterparty in the US, and at the Bank of England. Again, that is something which has allowed us to not only establish a very intense and robust direct supervision. We have thematic annual reviews, we have on-site inspections, we have fire drills, the full range of what is a direct prudential supervision of a globally systemic entity. But we also have worked very hard to have state-of-the-art data-based supervision in this field. So to establish a data-driven assessment of risks, daily provision of data, which is leading into ongoing indicators, into risk dashboards that we use and share also with the relevant national authorities to give information about what's happening. Again, all of this shows we have been able in different fields to develop and build supervisory knowledge. This is in different forms: direct supervision, shared supervisory responsibilities with NCAs, or even complementary ones. And it is further growing. Already, Verena mentioned there will be further responsibilities in the field of ESG data and rating providers, or the green bond external reviewers, and of course the consolidated tape providers that are to come. But perhaps to just focus very briefly on 2 or 3 critical aspects in this regard, because what is key for me is there is not a one-size-fits-all model to supervision. In particular, if you look at the SSM, there is a very clear case for local knowledge and proximity in some areas where the existence and the work of the national authorities is indispensable. There's no question on this, and there are mechanisms building around convergence that allow to provide a certain degree of harmonization of the supervisory approaches. But there are also areas where there is a very clear case for a more direct, integrated supervision, and this is for a number of reasons, mainly because of the holistic perspective that you have for the EU as a whole. And again, building on what I have seen in the field of CCPs, in particular in the recent crisis, of which we had a bit too many for my liking, when we saw that the individual view of a CCP is important, but it's not enough. And we have been at ESMA as the only authority who is involved, engaged in all EU CCPs, been able to have the view across CCPs, across the key members, banks, and their clients. It's still not enough. We still need to improve. And when we had the crisis, we had to build up very rapidly ad hoc data collection mechanisms with the support of the national authorities. It can be done, but of course, institutionalized processes are probably much more preferable in this. The other aspect is that it is also breaking down barriers when you have direct supervision. It was mentioned the entry point, in particular from third countries. They clearly prefer to have a single point of reference that allows them to access the full EU market. And if it is a trusted, well-established body, as we hopefully have established in some of the areas I mentioned, again, this helps in this regard. What is key, however, is to make sure that there's a leveraging on the expertise and knowledge at the local level. And this, for me, means it's critical to have a clear allocation of responsibilities. Again, one example which I cannot spare you is now the experience with EMIR 3, where falling short of direct supervision, what was built was the closest proxy without going for direct supervision, which is a significantly enhanced convergence activity, but the result is cumbersome because it means we have a full duplication of supervision. Every national activity is fully reviewed and duplicated at the level of ESMA. Again, the result probably is a high degree of harmonization, consistency of approaches, but it comes at a cost. And again, there is a clear case here for optimization. So with this and looking at the particular aspects that we have been mentioning, I can only concur with those of you who have been identifying areas for which direct supervision may be particularly convincing. Market infrastructures, for me, is a compelling case. Trade venues, major asset providers, the crypto service providers that have been mentioned. But what is key is there is not a one-size-fits-all, and we need to take a clear look where is a preference to rely on the national, local expertise and where there is a clear pan-European systemic dimension which merits a closer look. One last point, if you permit me, to respond to Johannes with this fiscal responsibility, because that is something which repeatedly is brought up. We have spent so much energy in trying to build up a system where we not only have a highest scrutiny on the level of supervision, where we have a uniform CCP recovery and resolution regulation. If we reach a level where the discussion about fiscal responsibilities comes in, we have to have the failure of a number of major banks. We have to have the inability to recover the resilience of a CCP leveraging on their members. This is a situation where we have a number of additional questions before we come to the question whether there is a need to bail in a CCP. Perhaps the question of CCP access is the missing link, but that's for a different discussion. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much for highlighting the supervisory role of ESMA, which is not very sufficiently known and probably will need at some point to be evaluated externally and independently. I think mainly about rating agencies, which is the oldest one, but it is the example that might be applicable to other areas. So it will be important to know how it functions really, and if that can be evaluated independently. Can we move to you, Carmine? You will provide us, you have been an insider of this, and now you can have the global vision or external view on this. And I know you can be very short and to the point.
Yeah, insider not being jailed. So thanks in particular to AFR and Pervanche and for the invitation, and Robert for the report, but also for a lot of discussions along all those years. Now, I can do two things, Fabrice. One thing is in 5 seconds. Yes, is my answer to the question of the panel. So, is some integrated supervision success factor for savings investment? Yes. Or I can maybe try to elaborate, even if for an Italian to be brief is not so easy. Now, first, one thing is EU competitiveness, but also competitiveness of the EU with respect to others. And I would say competition in the EU. Maybe sometimes there is too much focus also of policymakers, of market participants, of politicians, to have to competition with respect to the other 26 markets, okay? And this is obviously a problem because it has been an obstacle to the EU competitiveness all over the world as we have seen. So on these, very briefly, I will go with sweeping statements. We need an ideological change, I think, all over the supply chain, so policymakers, market participants, so on. So the idea, not thinking in terms of your national market, your national financial services chain, but more in relation to the others to be more competitive. I think Draghi Letta report are there, and I'm happy that also EU authorities like former Italian prime ministers to write reports. So we expect a Gentiloni report, I guess, in a few months. The second point is savings and investments union. By the way, the S is always very relevant. Maybe it's not perfect in English, but as was for capital markets union. Many people forget the S in capital markets union, but this was the original idea also of the Commission, not having one market, one supervisor, but again, it's developing all together. And I think now, obviously, everyone says we need, it's not anymore a nice to have, we need to have stronger capital markets in Europe, for economic reasons. I mean, this is obvious. They are there. The history tells us that they are there for, large, long-term investments, developments, US history, network, railways, telecommunications, so they are there. They are there because they are obviously more, other things being equal, as economists say, more, resilient in terms of shocks. I was part of the board of ESMA with some of you here, and then, I remember those dramatic days of COVID. I mean, COVID with the stupid discussion of closing the markets. Obviously, this was not our position. But during COVID, I mean, markets, there were $7 trillion that were raised, equity and bonds on the market. Luckily, markets were open. They are there, by the way, equity, but also bonds exactly for that. So this is why we need. And we need also, this has been the savings and investments. So savings, because, I mean, this is a question, and some people know I'm getting old, always say the same things. I'm passionate. This is a question of financial democracy. Having more and more direct and indirect participation of investors, savers, of citizens, of taxpayers to the market is to have an easier way to participate, not only in corporate wealth, but is in their own wealth, in the country. So this is really very important. And unfortunately, EU markets are not there. I mean, they are small. I mean, and capital markets like growth and growth like capital markets. I mean, simply after the global financial crisis, US, I mean, has grown twice as much. All indicators for EU markets are less relevant than the EU size in terms of GDP. So this is just to put it quick and simply. And I mean, none of the largest 10 tech companies are EU. They're all, all US. I mean, 2 out of the largest 20. And this is not a question of large companies. This is relevant for SMEs, because SMEs are the growth companies, the young companies, those that need capital markets. And by the way, they employ 2/3 of people in the EU. A third point, so what to do, usual things, but again, that has been said, and they will be also said later. Everyone likes to say impossible things, like, insolvency rules. But this participation is an issue. Later, Draghi, all the reports, Moyer, and I mean, now everyone discovers that we have also insurance and pension funds. They were already there, but obviously they are critical. There has been issues, more, the largest, as you know, EU market in terms of listed companies is not France, is not Germany, is not here, is Sweden, And why? We have a lot of direct and indirect participation there. By the way, it's also the largest in terms of market cap for growth market. So this is the question. So, and then I saw on Politico that a big part of now the plan, which will be announced on April 1st, which actually in Italy is also this day of jokes, so maybe it's better to do on April 2nd, otherwise people may think it's a joke, but is also to having this investment in savings account, whatever, like a UK or Swedish model. So we need that, strengthening public market, and then is, again, the question, integrated supervision, honestly, nothing new. Who was at the beginning? You were mentioning Howell Jackson. I remember I was at Brook Law in 2003 and discussing exactly this with this idea there. I mean, I think in some ways the technical debate has been in the first panel, but more and more integrated, I think, supervision is there. I think the SEC wording is not correct. I think it's too early to have a European SEC, meaning only a single supervisor somewhere. Paris is nice. Now it's 3 years I'm living here. But if we want more neutral, we can find the Vatican, even if they have some things in the banking sector. But okay, we can, but it's too late to have only basically local supervisors. But Verena was mentioning, proximity is still a value, So whatever federal system is, we want to call it federal. Obviously, some more supervision at the center for whatever large companies, cross-border, systemic, optional system, opt-in, 28, whatever you want, but now there is no time to elaborate. But this is, I think, But with a change in governance, not because it's not working, I mean, I was part of the board happily, but simply because it's a question also of perception, credibility, and again, inventing nothing is the ECB. The executive board, the 6 members, and honestly, again, the AFR paper, I like it a lot, summarizing also a lot of the debate is there. So with 6 people there, but also the contribution of the others, as also Stephen was saying. So this is a change, but also let me say that, okay, we don't have anymore the political issues of the cities. Why we have 3 ESAs? Why we had the 3 committees? Simply for the 3 cities, London, Paris, and Germany. We know. So de la Rosière was quite clear. Okay, let's go to, and now we don't have anymore the problem of the 3 cities. We have 2, by the way, for the toss of coin, even is here. So let's simplify this. And the final point, Fabrice, because I'm Italian, I'm talkative, but be careful, EU 27. To have, I mean, capital markets are global. EU capital markets, peanuts, 10% of global market cap. So it's important to be in an international, framework. We need leaders in the market, but if the EU thinks to be a leader and has no follower, is not anymore the leader. So global standards are there, and selling my carpet, OECD also obviously is a big part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmine, for this very wise last comment. And last but not least, before I try to sum up the discussion, the voice of the industry, Nicolas, you have the floor.
Yes. Thank you very much, and thank you to AEFR for inviting me and to have the chance to try to represent the voice of the industry, or at least part of the industry, more precisely the asset management industry. I think, as Carmine just mentioned, it's important to remember that this discussion we are having are triggered about the thinking around the way to make first the EU more competitive and to ensure that we are more savings geared toward financing investment and financing in particular the green, the digital, all the transitions we have to finance. So I think in that regard it's important to be to try to be very pragmatic and to look at issues we are trying to solve and to look at it, and it's really different sector by sector, issue by issue. So I will try to concentrate on asset management. As you know, Amundi is the first European asset manager. We are indeed supervised by, I think, 11 national authorities, as Robert mentioned. So supervised by 11 authorities, starting, of course, with the French one, with AMF, but 10 other one, and we are distributing in most of the European countries. So I haven't counted all the countries on which we distribute, but it's probably around 20. And so when you look from our perspective, from an asset manager's perspective into the issue of supervision, it's really important to distinguish 2 aspects. And that's probably one of the specificity for our sector. Many in the previous in the previous roundtable mentioned that capital markets are different from banks, and they cannot be looked the same way. Within, I would say, capital market, I think it's true also for the various dimensions and components or contributors to the capital market. So when you come to asset management, it's really important to distinguish between entities and products. As far as entities are concerned, again, taking the example of Amundi, 11 supervisors, the most important point for me when you think about going to more integrated supervision, whatever the format, is to, first of all, to recognize that there are groups. And that's, I think, the starting point when you look at it. If you look at all the legislations and regulations around asset management in Europe or at national level, the group doesn't exist. You have investment companies, they are looked the same way, whether they are part of a bigger group or not. So I think it's, and at the same time, and that's the way we are organized, if we want to be efficient, if we want to provide the best service to the clients, if we want to provide access to very efficient and recognized and performing managers, you need to reason as a group. You need to have centralized pool of expertise for functions such as, of course, investment management, but also risk, IT, fund management selections, to give some examples. And so the current system, in fact, even if it allows, let's be honest, not a problem, we are able to work as a group and to centralize resource to be as efficient and performing as possible. But it often, the way the legislation and the regulation is organized lead to some duplication of functions, because and it's required by the legislation. If one investment company in a country delegates a part of its activities to another one, it has to control, it has to redo part of the work, which is not all of it, but part of the work which is done somewhere else. So I think the most efficient way to remove this duplication is to recognize the notion of group of asset managers, at least EU group, because it's important to distinguish between EU groups and delegation of function within EU, where there's a common pool of regulations, even if it's not implemented always the same way, compared to a delegation outside. The format can be discussed. I think a good way is probably to have some sort of supervision by the home national authority or the main national authority for the group. But I think it's really a prerequisite before envisaging integrated supervision. Otherwise, we'll just have duplication. Benoît was mentioning the dyssynergies that came from the SSM. I think this risk of dyssynergies and this risk of resistance, I would say, from the industry, Marianne, you alluded to it regarding banking union, will be even stronger in our field if we don't start with this aspect. Regarding products, obviously the way we need to look at it is also a bit different. If you look at numbers, and I was looking at the data from EFAMA or European Association, I think there's 67,000 funds in Europe, within the European Union. They represent broadly, if I'm correct, 14 or 15 trillion euros, out of which more than 5 billion are cross-borders. That means they are distributed from one country to others, and a bit more than 8 to 9 billion are purely domestic. So it means that more than 5 billion cross-border, it means that cross-border distribution exists and is successful. We should start with that. It could be better. There's things to be improved, but it works. And I think the most important difficulty today to ensure that we are more efficient, that we can distribute more easily, more rapidly from one country to another, is a divergence in supervision in the distribution of products, which remain in the hand of national authorities for reasons or investor protection that was presented. And it's particularly true, for example, for marketing documentation, especially marketing documentation, which has to be validated in each and every country. So I think that's where if we again want to work more efficiently, we need to concentrate. And common and stronger convergence in the application of rules is a very important aspect. It has to be counterbalanced by another important aspect, which is time to market. When we want to be efficient, to promote a product, to innovate, to answer to needs that change due to the market context, time to market is very important. And that's where, when you look at investment funds, again, 67,000 funds in Europe. Just for Amundi, it's like something like 3,000. So it's too many. We need to work on it. But there are still some reasons to do that. I think if you want to preserve time to market, before moving to something more integrated, you need to really ensure that you can preserve this time to market. And that's why, as far as products are concerned, I think what is very important is to, before moving to any integrated model, is to look at all the ways to have a stronger single rule book, more convergence, more use of the tools that exist, maybe new tools to be defined, recognition by national authorities of the documentation which is validated somewhere else. But I think it's a priority again to be pragmatic.
Well, thank you, Nicolas. And with very concrete proposals, I think the discussion can really progress. Thank you very much for that. Before we open the floor for questions or comments between panelists, if you allow me to try to sum up a little bit the different scenarios that have been alluded to during the morning and during this panel to try to see what a way forward could be. I think sorry, I will say things very basic, but if we are discussing supervision, supervisors are here to supervise. And then the question is, how do you ensure that supervision is done in the most efficient manner? Not for the beauty of doing efficient supervision. It's because your very point, Benoit, it's because efficiency of supervision will permit that there will be efficient allocation of capital and that the savings will reach the investment place where it's mainly needed and urgently needed. So the guiding principle should really be efficiency of supervision. And as you said, Marianne, it's not just stability, which some people have the banking model in mind here, but it's about investor protection, it's about market transparency and disclosures, it's about fair and proper functioning of the market to allow that this allocation of capital, and it's about market integrity. And if I hear to what you said, all of you, and we keep in mind the fundamental principle of the single market, which is home host, I see 5 levels of ways you could organize supervision. Number one, if the market is harmonized by EU law, but it remains very national, then obviously it's for national competent authorities to do that. The other ones relying on that national competent authority. But then to be efficient, it needs, that it was mentioned in panel 1, that they have the same powers and the same sanctioning powers to be credible, so one can rely on the other. The second possibility is, of course, mutual recognition of supervisory decisions. But then, to be efficient, you need convergence of supervisory practices. It was mentioned, peer reviews, but also the same supervisory intensity and the same willingness to cooperate. Then the third layer is you could coordinate this mutual recognition of decisions by ESMA, and there to be efficient, national competent authorities need to accept to implement level 3 measures developed by ESMA, or even opinions disclosed by ESMA, and accept common decisions. A fourth layer, which is very less explored, could be to give the lead to ESMA, and there to be efficient to delegate powers under Article 28 to ESMA. I will come back to that. And of course, the last layer, which is developed this morning, which is to fully give the powers, central powers, fully integrated supervisory powers with ESMA. And we saw it, and Klaus described it. And again, I think analysis on how efficiently this is done with rating agencies is missing in the discussion. But you could see that in this gradual variety of way of organizing the supervisory function in the EU, from national to supranational, there is a variety of situations, and it was mentioned several times this morning. Financial markets regulation and supervision is different from banking because of financial instruments, very varied products, new products. You mentioned crypto assets, Marianne. Differences of market player and financial services that are very different from one from the other. Different market infrastructures, different categories of issuers, different categories of investors, and different categories of fraudulent practices. So full variety that are embedded in more than 35 directives. So the result of that variety is that it will always be, it is, and it will always be a mix of national supervision, coordinated supervision, and supranational supervision for financial markets. The question is, how do you know where the supervisory efficiency lies? And there I would suggest that to have really more pragmatic and find solutions that are really operational and correspond to real reality, that we bring more objectivity to the discussion. And I would suggest that the Commission could start doing a sort of supervisory efficiency test. And for that, to define criteria, mainly of the level of integration of the market, the intensity of use of the passport, you mentioned it, Nicolas, the number of market players, is it a small market or is it a very varied market, the categories of investors that are involved, access to data, which is key for supervision, are there breaches to the level playing field or not, and is this done in a cost-efficient manner for the regulated entities, and other criteria. And based on that test, there could be a discussion about whether that should be in level 1, 3, 4, 5, depending on where the efficiency of supervision lies. And it should be done most likely periodically to measure the level of integration of the market, but at least every time a directive or regulation is reviewed. If I may, another suggestion, I think I mentioned it, that was the fourth level in my description. There should be maybe a more intensive use of Article 28 of the ESMA regulation, which is a very pragmatic way forward. Article 28 allows delegation of tasks and responsibilities between authorities and to ESMA. So it's a very flexible one that will allow any kind of arrangement, which means that NCA and ESMA can, for example, create a tailor-made college of supervisors that exists today in intergovernmental arrangements, but not embedded into ESMA. It can create centralization of reporting. It can create even an opt-in without legislative change. I repeat, you can create an opt-in without legislative change. So it will allow a bottom-up approach and can be reverted if not inefficient. So just an idea to consider. I was sure that it will trigger remarks. Marianne.
Thank you, Fabrice. It is very technical, I'm sorry, but yes, Article 28 looks like a very good idea. Unfortunately, it doesn't work because it doesn't allow for delegation of responsibility. It allows for delegation of activity, and I can say that, I think, looking at it very closely currently on crypto asset platforms, how much we can delegate to ESMA in terms of efficiency of building competencies. But one of the obstacles is that it does not allow full delegation of responsibility. So, and that is of the essence, obviously, because supervision is also a question of responsibility. And as far as we cannot fully delegate responsibility, it's difficult to delegate full powers. So that is something that will have to be looked at carefully if we want to progress in that area. Maybe two other comments. Supervision is something that, and Klaus was very clear about it, supervision exists at ESMA. It was very important to state it today because I hear a lot that ESMA is not a supervisor, so it's the full chicken and egg situation. ESMA is considered not to be a supervisor, so we cannot give it more supervisory powers. So that's the chicken and egg situation that we hear a lot about. It's not true. It was shown. Obviously, the mix of jobs at ESMA between regulation and supervision is still very much in the area of regulation, but there are some solid bases to build more supervision, at ESMA's level. By the way, this is probably a strong difference, and Benoit mentioned it also, between competition regulation and financial supervision. There is no day-to-day supervision of actors in the competition area, which is really a wide and important difference between what we are doing. Supervision is something that we are doing on a day-to-day basis, and it's not only acting when there is an operation. This is more like market operation regulation and supervision that we are doing also as market regulators, but it's really a daily, and it's a job, by the way, but ESMA has started for quite a while now to develop it. Maybe also, if we want to progress, we need to make sure, at least rapidly, that ESMA has the last word. I don't know how we can achieve that. I have a personal and very clear proposal to make, which is to rapidly open the mediation powers of ESMA to the private sector. Currently, we as national regulators can ask for a mediation at ESMA where we see divergence in the implementation of such and such legal provision. To that day, it's not open to the private sector. The private sector can ask for ESMA to produce Q&As on the subject, but it's not the same. So I think it could be also, well, either we have a large step driven politically, and we will all be very happy about that. If it does not happen, we have to look at small steps. I mentioned supervision of crypto assets because I think there is no national attachment to this competence or to these players because it's just a new competence in the EU. But I also think that we could consider giving more powers to ESMA, especially where the industry sees divergences in supervisory practices. Because, well, obviously, a European supervision will not create a European market. That is not the silver bullet, and I fully agree with Johannes. We should not sell that as the silver bullet, because it's obviously not going to deliver that, and we see that in the banking market. SSM has not delivered a completely integrated banking market in the EU. However, we see that supervision, and the industry voice was very clear about that, can be a strong obstacle to more integrated markets in the EU. But we could help the industry to get more integrated approaches or convergence approaches by this type of instruments, where they could probably ask ESMA to have the last word where they see diverging practices. Thank you very much.
Yeah, two things. I mean, first, I think ESMA having the last word is very important. That's what we have in competition, with DG Comp having the last word in antitrust, not in mergers, but in antitrust. And they're never using it, but of course it's a kind of atomic threat deterrent, which is very important to keep the system together. Second, I can't resist bringing back the F word, fiscal, which has been raised already. And I know that's not the discussion we're having today, and we have to accept that we have no fiscal union, and it's a kind of political dead end, and that might be the curse of the Draghi report is that maybe it goes too far in that direction, and this is why it has become an easy target because it was maybe going too far in that direction, but. We also have to be lucid and to accept that it is there. That is, we won't have the peculiarity of everything of the whole institutional framework in Europe is that we want to have a monetary union, a banking union, and maybe a capital market union and a single market without a fiscal union. And, that's not going to work. So we just have to accept that that the monetary union will remain unfinished, banking union will remain unfinished, capital market union, whatever the form it takes after our discussion today, will remain unfinished. And also even the single market remains unfinished because you have, I mean, the stated discussion is to the single market was the discussion on deposit insurance or liquidity in resolution is to the banking union. It just evidences, it uncovers the fact that we are not having a fiscal union and that it makes the market fundamentally incomplete. So it's a fact. We're not going to do anything about it, but let's not ignore it.
Quick, Fabrice, I mean, you mentioned Article 28. I think Marianne is making a good point in terms of responsibility. I remember that the proxy, I mean, simply competent authorities that do not want any delegation to others. The proxy, we wrote a paper some years ago on prospectus, is already in prospectus regulation, possibility for someone to ask your authority to approve the prospectus will be approved by another one. Simply just two authorities in the EU has published the criteria to do that. Very opaque, and it doesn't happen because first, basically, this is blocked before many of us has been or are supervisors. Second, important again for the, I mean, the problem is not regulation. Despite the use of many more regulations than directives, is the interpretation of regulations. Stephen mentioned the sanction for MAR, but there are interpretation of other issues like what is an inside information, which is incredibly different. That's why we need a stronger, supervisory, convergence, but in the interpretation is not having just the supervision of entities at the center, but the purpose. And third, but the topic is that in the new world, I mean, you see the true dossier are not ESMA, good point to say ESMA review and not ESA review, but actually, where are the dossier, Verena? There are all the important ones in the joint committee, because they are cross DG and the others. So I think that still thinking of an ESA review and the architecture is important.
Just trying to be very short, I was looking at the question, is integrated supervision a success factor for the saving investment union on EU competitiveness? I would say maybe. It depends on the way we do it. If it really brings more convergence and you are very pragmatic about the way we do it and try to solve problems rather than build a cathedral, it may be, but definitely, of course, it will not be the silver bullet. And there's many, many other issues to tackle in terms of competitiveness, in terms of way to address and way to orient savings more to investment needs in Europe, but that's for another forum probably.
A very short one, actually, because a lot has been said, and I'm not going back on the fiscal point of Benoit. But again, it is important to look at the specific area, the particularities. It's important to understand that we have a robust governance structure in place, in particular at ESMA, where if we talk about ESMA, of course, in the board, we have all the national authorities represented having a word. For the supervisory committee, it's the same. And for me, it's intriguing to see that over time, and it's still a comparably short span, the number of contagious discussions has reduced dramatically. So there is an alignment of views through the actual cooperation on the supervision. And this allows to build, this is the establishment of trust, and we can work on this going forward to make it even more effective.
Well, thank you very much for the last comment. Thank you very much to all the panelists for this lively discussion, which I hope will contribute to the next one. As you know, every time you transfer powers, you need to change decision-making powers and governance. So I think it's a good transition for the next panel. Thank you very much.
I know this program is very frustrating because there's no pause foreseen, and there has been some Q&A session that has been announced, but they don't happen. So let's start for this third panel, and thank you to all of you for joining us. The theme for this panel would be how to get there. Is governance the key? And I have the honor to chair this very well-fitted, I think, panel for this discussion with some legislators, some regulators, and some market participants. Maybe I will start. If you have a coffee in the end of the room, please make it silently, because we would get very frustrated for two reasons. We don't have coffee and we can't hear each other very well. maybe I'm very ambitious, so I will try to have 2 rounds of intervention, and this depends on your discipline. First, I would like to try to ask a question. We heard a lot of argument, and we understand that the question might be political, and this means we need to convince in the council. So I would like to start with this one, how to convince the council. And here, Delphine Damarcet, you are on the market side, of course, at the head of Euronext France. And you've been part of the Noyer report. You've been contributing very importantly to the Eiffel report. And my question is, how would you answer this question? How to convince the council? What are the best arguments?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pervenche. Yes, I contributed indeed, and we are a very good guinea pig of centralized and of what we can do, what we can achieve if we are making it work. I don't know if I can answer the question because we would answer indirectly. First, we have to convince the market players. I'm struck that Euronext has taken a strong stance towards integrated and centralized supervision, or centralized and decentralized, but together, and that we feel a bit alone with that position. So, and there are a number of reasons for that. So I would say countries will be convinced when their market players are pushing, obviously, or sufficient number of them. Why we are looking for, and I do want a second round to go into more details indeed. Why would market players push for integrated supervision? Because they want agility in decision making. They want scalability, operational efficiency, and they want fair competition. And for that, they need to have consistency in supervision and regulation. They need to have a fair perimeter of how things are designed, including when there would be some centralized supervision and some decentralized. And of course, they will need a system that is simple. Simple enough so that it's a progress. The previous discussions were a bit worrying in that matter, but so I think we should not make that a prerequisite, because otherwise nothing. I mean, we cannot promise simplification first and then supervision. Unique supervision. It has to go hand in hand, but we definitely need that in the model to convince countries. To convince member states, there will need to be reassurance that there is no hidden plan to move everything to Paris, which for me is a complete fake news. Paris is a great location, but I don't think that because ESMA is next door, there will be a change in market structure. I think this would have already opened, and it's not. There's no way that we feel that because ESMA is in Paris, we have a specific access, for instance, from Euronext Paris. I wouldn't say it's the contrary, but ESMA is super careful in being extraordinarily fair to in terms of access. So that's really a way to divert the discussion from real issues. What I think could be convincing is, of course, the end goal that people have in previous rounds have explained. Increasing investments, providing more efficiency, more capital, having a European domestic pool that is big enough so that we benefit from the European domestic bias that will be conducive to the transitions we need to finance, and also to give a better return for savers altogether. And also the second argument is that it would enable different models to strive and give a chance to the models that, like our model, are bottom-up construction by federating existing players, and this is also the case for other groups, to reach a scalability and a simplified model that makes it possible to scale while continue to address and to different markets with some local presence. While otherwise the other solution is that you come from elsewhere, you pick a country, you use the passport to address the markets from far away, then it creates the situation that Nicolas Calcun has described, where you then domestic markets will put in place domestic distribution rules to try to control whatever is happening. And so the top-down, bottom-up discussion, if we don't have an efficient and integrated supervision, the tendency will be to use the second model. And I'm not sure member states will be winners with that. So we clearly need to have the two models coexist efficiently, but with a fair situation. So in the second round, I would love to go into more specific proposals.
Thank you so much. Julien Jardelot, you're not quarantined pour Alvé Clédière,
as you can
was
see.
announced in the program, but we are happy that you can replace her on behalf of ELSEG, and maybe you could answer exactly the same question.
Sure, thank you for having me, and again, big shoes to fill, so I will do my best. I think the way I would summarize it is by a few concepts. We want sovereignty, we want prosperity. If you want sovereignty, you need prosperity. If you want prosperity, you need to be competitive. If you want to be competitive, you have to have EU scale. That's essentially the world we're living in. And so we've had a lot of discussions in EMEA and often joke about which number of EMEA will be the right one to give us the direct supervision by ESMA. And the reason for that is that to be competitive, especially as CCPs, we have to have scale, EU scale. And we have to be quick. And today, when you look at the way supervision functions, it can be a bit clunky and it can be a bit slow. And there's not necessarily the right level playing field in EU. What does that mean concretely? That means that we are slower. And because we have to cater for multiple regulation, multiple supervision, it means that we can be costlier than our competitors outside of the EU. So it means that not only we're slow, but we are more costly when the customer come to us. And that's something that is really important in terms of our competitiveness. So how do we address that? It's how do we convince council members that they need to move on? The first point I would make is, with my hat as co-chair of the Association of European CCPs, I'm a bit more optimistic than you, Delphine, because I'm starting to see members, even the ones that are really opposed to EU supervision, starting to open up. It still means that they want supervision on their turf. It has to be in their city. But I'm starting to see the industry really moving forward in terms of the ideas. And the reason for that is that people are seeing that we have an issue of scale and speed. Speed is CCPs need to update their risk models constantly. And it's not because we want to be more competitive, it's because we want to address risks. And the way to do that is to constantly, essentially, improve the parachutes to make sure that we have, the state-of-the-art parachutes on financial markets infrastructures. That can take up to 2 years, 3 years sometimes to launch new products, and sometimes a few months to launch changes to risk models and parameters, which means that we are less reactive. And when you manage a CCP, which main competitors are outside of the EU, that means that your US competitors have 45 days non-objection. You can take up to 2 years to launch a new product. Guess where the competition is going? So that's a really big problem. The second one is, even having that and having this very specific regulation, we still struggle to have a level playing field. Because the reason for that is ESMA can only apply a level playing field to what comes to ESMA. And so you have a lot of things that are decided by European national competent authorities that will have a different approach, because we have, everybody has a different approach to legislation, which means that in practice we tend to have the worst of both worlds. So very demanding regulation, but at the same time no level playing field. And so we need to address that. So how we see EU supervision for us is EU scale, because again, and there was a comment earlier on the essentially aligning the markets, creating markets, EU markets by supervision. I think in fact it's the other way around. The EU CCP is already there. I mean, you look at LCHSI, we clear the vast majority of government debts in the EU. We are the only CDS CCPs in the EU. We have EU scale. We just need the supervision to follow that. So it's more the supervision that has to adapt to the markets than the other way around, in my view. So we need that. We need a better and unified interpretation because we have, we can have some arbitrage, and depending on which side of the border you are, you can have very different interpretation of EU regulation, which is a problem for competitiveness. And we have a problem of time to market, as I mentioned. So the three benefits I see in terms of moving, in terms of the EU supervision is better time to market, better alignment of rules, which means also that we are easier to read for non-EU investors and non-EU regulators. We see clients telling us, well, I don't understand, I'm doing that in this CCP, but you can't do it. It's like, yeah, we have different regulators. We still have this problem, so it's a problem of attractiveness. And to the point I think it was made by Madame la Présidente de l'AMF, you were saying about the simplifying regulation. And that's a very important point, is I think the competitiveness goes through the harmonization of EU rules via supervision rather than by regulation. And so if we have an ESMA that has direct supervision, we can go through that, make the regulation more flexible, and does that. Two very quick points and then I'll stop. Governance, I think Klaus mentioned it, we have a very good precedent in terms of the governance of the supervision of CCPs, because we have the CCP Supervisory Committee that is already there. And second, hasn't been mentioned, but we need ESMA to have proper funding. Because one of the points that is pointed out is, well, ESMA doesn't have the resources, but we don't give them the resources. I'm still looking for the impact assessment that gives more ESMA resources in EMIR 3. It's not there. There's no resources for ESMA. So it's a very important point.
Thank you so much. François asks, on behalf of Banque de France, maybe you can share with us some of the conclusion of the Eurosystem high-level task force in response to the Commission consultation on NBFI and the appropriate prudential framework. I mean, many things have been said already on behalf of what's happening in the banking world, but maybe also taking into account what you heard, what would be your message to the Council to convince them to move on, based on this work you did with the task force?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Yes, well, I guess the message would be, and it was alluded to earlier in the previous panels and by Robert, about the financial stability and the macro-prudential framework, which we feel at the Eurosystem is increasingly important in the world we are moving in, especially if we are to develop this saving and investment union, which means relying more on markets. And so we need markets which are stable to be able to provide for this financing. So very briefly to come back to history, the Eurosystem decided to set up a sort of so-called high-level task force last year to answer the Commission's questions on NBFI. I guess it was one of the very first time that the Eurosystem has set up a task force among its members. And to this work, were both ESRB and ESMA were associated, in fact, as observers and very useful contributors. Basically, this task force came with six conclusions, which all of them at one or another level call for more centralized supervision. The task force recommended that we finally implement the reforms that have been agreed within the FSBs, but not yet implemented in Europe. It recommended that we develop ex-ante toolkit for the authorities to deal with situations such as liquidity mismatch in open-ended funds, excessive leverage. It recommended that we find a way to better share data among supervisors at the national and at the EU level. And it recommended also that we develop one of very powerful tool, which is the so-called system-wide stress test, which is both a way for supervisors and for the industry to really assess what's going on in markets and what are the dynamics in markets. And it's also very useful, as we can see today from what the feedback we get from the UK. It's also very useful for the industry itself to understand the interconnections. Lastly, we also, one of the recommendations was to give ESMA more powers in relation with ESRB as a consulting body. And these powers would basically go into two directions. One would be to develop what is called reciprocation, basically the ability for ESMA to assess when a measure taken by a national authority should be extended across the EU. The other recommendation relates to the so-called top-up powers, where ESMA would be able to decide that a measure taken by a national authority should be topped up, basically, because of financial stability considerations. This could, as I mentioned, apply to liquidity mismatches, situation, leverage, excessive leverage situations. Obviously, the objective of this recommendation and of this work is, but again, this has been said already quite a lot, is to have a consistent treatment of risk within the EU when it comes to capital market and financial stability. And that applies both to, and I think it's important in the context of this discussion, it applies both to the supervision of entities, but also the supervision or the understanding, the assessment of activities within these entities. Second objective, obviously, is to promote a level playing field within the industry and to reduce the risk of arbitrage between jurisdictions and to reduce regulatory fragmentation. So I'm afraid, I mean, we feel that precisely in the context of the development of this saving and investment union, having stable capital markets able to deliver on what they are expected to deliver in terms of funding is very important. I'm quite aware also that adding this dimension adds another layer of difficulty in the discussion that we had today. But thank you.
Thank you for doing so, because the topic was too easy. Christophe Berry, on behalf of the French Treasury, and Martin Merlin on behalf of the Commission. Somehow you are on the leading side when it will come to the initiative and capacity to transform the deal or to make a deal. I would like to raise for you the same question. One of the points of entry of the debate paper of the AEFR are the conclusion of the European Council when it says improving the convergence and efficiency of the supervision of capital market across the EU as the title of its paragraph regarding CMU in its conclusion. Do you think what you've heard this morning on the importance of the supervision as such over and above regulation, is it likely to influence the discussion in the Council? Isn't focusing on governance a way of working towards a more agile, more flexible supervision, less locked into a set of regulation? It's this whole topic of where is the right dynamic to move between supervision / regulation, and how to convince in the Council. Christophe Borry, maybe you start, and then we will end up with Martin for this first round.
Yes, yeah. Sorry. Thank you, Pervenche. I'm not sure we're leading on this issue, but we certainly try to have initiative. On your question, and I think this whole question about how we convince in a council, Well, certainly, I think all we heard this morning about the needs is clear. I think nobody is really in the industry, and even in countries that are really opposed to a move on supervision, nobody is actually saying that we don't need a level playing field, we don't need to reduce the burden of compliance costs for cross-border market players, that we don't need to have a clear single rule book and something that is really applied everywhere. So, I mean, on the need, I think there is no particular reason for people to oppose. The question is, of course, the delivery of our solution to this need. And that's where I think EU traditionally is at its best when it tries to be pragmatic and try to find compromises and find something where everybody at least is, well, trusting that there is something for them in that solution. And that's probably part of the question and the really, really difficult battles, trench warfare on this question for many years, is that for some countries, clearly, they don't see how progress on this question would fit in their interest, would support what they are doing at the moment. And so we have to convince them of that. And that's where both on the mandates of what we would ask the ESMA to do and on the governance, we have to find an appropriate balance. We have to find a solution, not, of course, because we want everything in Paris, because that's a fake news, as my neighbor said very clearly. Not because we think everything makes sense to be supervised at the highest level. It's not subsidiarity. It's not what we have in mind. We need to respect that, and we need to find clear rules. And it has been mentioned also earlier this morning, the question of acting step by step and by easily understandable steps is probably the way to go. So we don't have the clear-cut difference as in the banking system between significant institutions and others. We mainly because on the issue of financial markets, there are several different types of players, so we could already use that. Of course, that's the way ESMA has now already some direct supervision powers. We could continue in that direction, and I certainly support the idea of using crypto as a new step in that direction. So that would be a way to convince that is a bit easier than others, because basically if NCAs don't have powers at the moment, they don't lose anything if ESMA gets it. That's a bit basic, but that's a simple argument. Now, of course, it's a bit, and it's way, not a bit, it's way more difficult if we talk about players that are currently supervised by their NCA, but that actually makes sense to be supervised at European level. And that's where you talk about your large market infra of Europe and or large asset managers that have cross-borders activities. So that's where the convincing has to go. But again, to explain that we want to go step by step and not force everybody under the same solution. And governance should help, especially also on governance, we try to find subsidiarity and balance. We don't think the ESMA governance as it is would have to stay exactly the same. If ESMA evolves in terms of mandate, it could also evolve in terms of governance. And in particular, to have a distinction between, let's say, individual cases and norms is probably the summa divisio we want. It's normal, and it's kind of the European solution to have everybody involved, all the 27, on norms. That's logical, that's regulation. But on individual cases, much less so. So the solutions that was used currently for CCP with the CCP Supervisory Committee is probably a basis. It could actually be increased in terms of resources and powers, this committee. And basically, it's the AMLA solution, in a way, to have individual cases reported to an executive board or council that takes that into consideration, but a different way for for the production and interpretation of norms. And let's say the final leg of this governance structure would be when, let's say for the day-to-day supervision, where joint action between NCAs and ESMA is probably the way to go, with some balance that has to be found, again, based on the more or less Europeanized and cross-border activity of the places considered. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Same question for you, Martin Merlin, even though we understand that now the responsibility on the shoulders of the Commission is much bigger than for any other stakeholders.
Thank you. Well, first I should say that I found the report very interesting, very stimulating, and also the debate today was very rich, so a lot of food for thought for the Commission, more food for thought, so we welcome that. Now on what to do with the Council, well, if the goal is to have more unified supervision, we should remember that the Council is a large body. Johannes mentioned Berlin. Of course, the view of Berlin is important. But the idea that if Paris and Berlin agree, somehow we will be able to implement what we think should be implemented is probably not correct. We need to think of some member states which are home to very large financial centers and which for the moment do not see any reason to change. And also many smaller member states with no real financial centers don't really have a stake in the debate. So that can help in a way, but they may also not want to embark in difficult reforms. So clearly there will be heavy lifting to do. One thing which is important will be, in my view, to speak at the right level. If we remember the creation of the SSM, it came from the European Council. I mean, we discovered on Monday morning that they wanted us to have single supervision for the largest banks, and we did that. So it is important not to get bogged down in technical discussions which are not at the right level. I'm not saying that people who want unified supervision will get it from the top, but I think you have more chances to get it if you have the discussions and the negotiations at the right level. Now, how to convince reluctant member states if, again, it is chosen to go in this direction? Well, clearly, we need to make sure that those member states are confident that the system will work, that the system will work for them. So we need to be able to convince them that there will be stability, market integrity, investor protection that really works for them. And here, clearly, governance is important. I think the present governance of ESMA works. It's maybe not ideal. Of course, we need to find compromises, but it works. And I think many member states are satisfied with it, broadly speaking. So before changing, we need to make sure that we change it in a way that preserves the confidence of all member states. And we have also something that works when it comes to CCPs by and large. Even though we supervise more CCPs outside the EU than inside the EU, which is a bit of a hard sell when you speak to third countries, but okay, it works. So one possibility, of course, is to move towards a more federal system akin to what we have in AMLA and the SRB. Maybe that makes sense if we want ESMA to take more supervisory decisions, then probably you need a small federal board that does that. But then appointments become very important, because when we go to a certain number of countries, what we hear is that, well, these large European bodies, they are established in Frankfurt and in Paris usually, And we never get to be, present at the head of the organizations. We don't get the chance to chair these organizations and even to become a board member. It's very hard for us. So we don't see ourselves in these bodies. So governance is important. Appointments, as difficult as it is very important as well in order to instill confidence. And then how to convince reluctant member states. Second point, clearly in the present context, the competitiveness, simplification, burden reduction angle is very important. Many member states will be sensitive to that. We have a supervisory landscape that is quite complex. And if we can demonstrate that we can have a leaner supervisory system, which at the end of the day maybe will allow us to produce less regulations, less texts, less detailed rules, that may indeed help. And we will need to build a business case. Fabrice mentioned a sort of supervisory efficiency test. I think this is what some member states are expecting us to do. We had very difficult discussions on the supervision of benchmarks, and even for a few tiny benchmarks, there was opposition to ESMA supervising these benchmarks out of the, I don't know, millions of benchmarks that we have. So this proves that the discussion is very difficult, but during that discussion, the feedback we got was, you need to demonstrate to us that doing certain things at European level is better for market integrity, investor protection, and competitiveness. Not so easy to do, but this is the kind of work that we will be undertaking in the coming months. Basically, we are asked to produce convincing impact assessments. So depending on what my commissioner and the College of Commissioners decide to do, if we think that European supervision is needed in some areas, then indeed the business case will have to be there from a stability investor protection angle and also from a competitiveness angle.
Thank you so much. So now that we know all the argument to convince the Council, maybe we could look at what to do in terms of governance, because it's been around the debate since this morning, and also I cannot resist to mention that the Economic Nobel Prize in 2024 had a strong plea in favor of institution as an important role to play in the working of a system. So Delphine Marzit and Julien Jardolo as a supervised entity, I would like first of you to come into the debate. And Delphine, you have a very special experience, because as a Euronext, you've been dealing with a college of regulator, a concept that you've been developing, and that appears to be listening to you in other forum as a positive experience. Do you think it could be helpful as a step-by-step approach for ESMA to build on this model?
Okay, sorry. We're down to two. Huh? Well, it has been our step-by-step approach for 24 years now. And it has been a very pragmatic solution. I would say mutually pragmatic solution, because in Euronext we work with a single platform. And so it's important for us to have consistency in our supervision. It's also important for our supervisors to be able to share decision, because otherwise we could be blocked or they could be a bit left out of some decisions. So I think it was mutually beneficial. It's actually a college of supervisors rather than regulators, but that's the word we use. And it has progressed because it has increased in number. but it's incomplete. It only covers the trading venues layers. So we've gone from 3 initially to 7 trading venues. We now also have 4 CSDs and 1 CCP. And for the CSDs or for the CCP, there are colleges, but not more, and not I would say Euronext colleges. It has also progressed in terms of how it works to keep up with the agility and scalability we need. For instance, now our regulators have agreed that they will share some of their supervisory actions to make it consistent. We had a not so great experience 2 years ago of having, I think ESMA asked the NCAs to conduct supervisory actions on market data. And we ended up at the time to have as many NCA interactions and ask as we had NCAs. Today it would be dealt differently with something in common, but it doesn't work for audits, for instance. So it has been our pragmatic solution, but it can, it's working on the consensus basis, and there is so much we can do on both sides to make it work when the license is fully national. In MiFID 2, and in MiFID, 1, 2, 3, there is no such things as a group of trading venues. It doesn't exist. So all the licenses are local. So whatever the goodwill on both sides, there are super big limits. I think this is why we want to go one step further. For that, like I said, we need a fair perimeter, and I encourage everyone to read the details of Robert's report for the AFR debate paper on what could be the relevant perimeter for each type of actors or products. For us, it's a combination of pan-European, one place pan-European reach and multi-local entities. And starting with the infrastructure makes a lot of sense. It's a question of articulating between local and centralized, of course. We have not touched that, but one of the tricky issues is issuers' surveillance, because they are not regulated. But they do have to obey an important number of rules. So that would probably have to stay local, even if it's not the case for the SEC. I think that would be too far-reaching for us. And yes, the governance has to evolve, because if we want to be, like I said, I don't think that the completely ad hoc college of regulator of Euronext cannot be a solution for everyone. But if we are supervised by ESMA, and we would like to be when it works, the governance cannot be of a consensus of all NCAs in Europe. It has to be some body. So the notion of the executive board would work for that, with carefully chosen independent members doing a job of supervisors, or a mix of a combination with the NCAs that are operational for us. So that's where it's probably too early to fine-tune. Like you say, we need to have the conviction to move forward first, but that's something that would be needed. Keeping in mind that this is all to make things more scalable and simpler in the end.
Thank you. I think simplification will be one consensus word for this morning. But Julien Jardelot,
and I will shut up forever. But in between, there are works that can be done to be treated as a group, working on the college, but benefiting from more easily outsourcing within the group, like my friend Nicolas Calcoun said earlier.
Julien Jardelot, we understand the level of ambition you're looking for, but in between, what would be your priority in a step-by-step approach if this is the way we should go?
I think I would have 2 steps in mind. The first one is how we address with the tools that we have today the issues of level playing field and of time to market. On the time to market, I think I would say it's an ecosystem issue. So CCPs need to be better at preparing filings, having stronger compliance teams, and really having a better dialogue with the regulators. And we need to make sure that we look very carefully into the what I would call the pre-submission phase. And that's one of the things that Emir is hinting at, is you have a very clear timing of what happens once it's officially submitted to NCS and to ESMA. The problem is, how long do we take to get there? And that's something we really need to have a KPI on. That's the first point. Second point is a level playing field. We really see sometimes requirements that are imposed that are 100 times literally higher in some countries than in others. It's very difficult to remain competitive like that at EU level. And so if there's a way to ensure that there's a better dialogue between the supervisory community to ensure there's more alignment, and ESMA is best place to facilitate that, I think that would be a very good solution. The third one, I would say, is step 2, is the point I was alluding to earlier, is even if we don't convince everybody that we need to move to EU supervision, the question is, can we afford to have EU-wide financial market infrastructures that are still supervised locally, and do we need supervision to catch up with a reality, which is that we have EU champions in EU, and we just need the supervision that follows the regulatory environment and the market. So if we can start by at least the big CCPs, you can look at initial margins. We've done this study in each. In fact, it was very interesting because you really have outliers, and then you have a tail of a lot of smallish CCPs. It's very easy to identify those CCPs. That could be a good way forward. And we speak, it's not just trying to, speaking without experience. We have the experience of ESMA direct supervision. We have a trade repository directly supervised by ESMA. We have a CCP directly supervised by ESMA. We're going to have an administrator of benchmarks soon. We're going to have an ESG rating soon. So we're going to be more than, supervised by ESMA. So we think it makes sense for this point I was making earlier about EU scale, and maybe we start by the entities that have already this EU scale.
Thank you so much. Good luck. François, as ACPR, what is your experience in the banking supervision and the role of GST? It's been mentioned also this morning. Can it be useful or not for the discussion on the power of ESMA, future power?
Well, I guess the short answer is yes. Having said that, I mean, it was mentioned earlier in the discussion. Banking union is not fully complete. Obviously, there are still a number of things to do. But the supervisory union is working, and this one is really a success. One element of this success is, I guess, I will leave aside the governance because we already discussed it. But one element of this success is the ability of the SSM plus the local authority, NCAs, to create a real team spirit in terms of supervision. It took time. It still takes time. It's work in progress, but it's something which works, which is fully internalized, I would say, by both Frankfurt and the local authorities. And so it works. It works because we were able over time to create this team spirit, which means having the right coordination mechanism and information sharing mechanism. And again, as I said, it's something that it never stops. I mean, it's something that you need to keep on doing on a day-to-day basis. It needs also it requires that we have a clear and shared supervisory strategy. At the same time, we need, because this is really a strength and some real added value, to be able to mix the different supervisory culture. The way banks were supervised within the EU before banking union was very different from one country to another. So creating this mix of experience, blending this mix of experience is very useful and is needed. I think it also needs one other element is to find the right balance between rules which are obviously needed, and judgment, because in the end, supervision is also about judgment and the ability to assess one's very specific situation. Last point, which is also needed to create this team spirit, is to be able to mix this form of intrusive supervision, which I think is the way Europe works, in contrast with some other large jurisdictions. So create this intrusive supervision, and at the same time being able to understand and take into account the local specificities. That means having this is what the joint supervisory team do. That's really what they do. And this also goes through constant dialogue between the center and the NCA. This goes through exchanges of staff on top of the exchanges of experience. So all in all, it works. It might be a little bit cumbersome, but it does work. And it can be, I think, a useful element to take into account when one thinks about direct supervision from ESMA. One last thing, maybe someone mentioned the form of hangover from the industry or a form of fatigue with the lack of results or the lack of progress. Yes, we can see that. At the same time, I think it's also important to emphasize that, as I said, the SSM is not is a living body, and it adjusts to situations. The threat process is in the process of being improved. So this is, again, one can have criticism with regard to the banking union because it's incomplete, but the supervisory part of it is, all in all, in net, I think, quite a success, and can give a lot of lessons to other governance framework.
Thank you. Christophe Bory, the President of the Republic, in his speech at Sorbonne II, mentioned that either in 12 months we managed to build a system with single supervision in order to build a system comparable to what we have done in banking supervision, or as some propose, we should maybe design a system as we have done in competition. Are we there yet?
Short answer is no, but still, I mean, what the president tried to do, I think, with this speech was to try to give a sense of urgency of making progress on this. And this has been the work of the French authorities in especially the first semester of 2024 was all about trying to make a lot of noise about Capital Markets Union and try to explain that we absolutely needed to use this opportunity of a new European mandate to kickstart again this process on all the major directions that we wanted to work on, and especially so on supervision. But to be frank, in the same sentence, I think in the speech, he also mentioned tax harmonizations on savings and insolvency laws harmonization. I'm not sure this is much easier, but the whole point was to mention very hard challenges, some that we have been working on for quite a while. So yeah, we are not there yet. What we have now is a process where we have European Council conclusions, we have the NESMA report, we have an ECB report, we have industry contributing report, we have an AFR report. Everybody has given its contribution. We have a lot of material now to try to make progress. Once again, we discussed before that we need to convince quite a lot of member states. That's true. But it's not by the lack of political will on those that are supporting this evolution that we are not moving yet. It's probably because we are still finding the best ways to make progress and convince. We have in the council we had discussions, especially on Financial Services Committee, on this. Of course, the usual balance manifested itself. But and I'll be interested in what Martin Merlin has to say about this. What the Commission has been preparing will be interesting to know. What we are hoping on our side is that this very clear signal from the top level at the European Council and from the industry and from think tanks has, a translation in some thinking at the Commission and proposals not too far away in the future, where we try to find these next steps that we have been discussing the whole morning, and we go in that direction. So we're not there yet, but we are not, of course, willing to say that the path is not there. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the floor is obviously for you, Martin Merlin. You heard a lot of expectation on once more on your shoulders, but maybe before answering Christophe Boris' question, could you address the question also that was raised during the debate, that maybe some of the ESA reform progress from the previous reform are not fully used, or could be better used? Do you think this is also an issue of governance, and that the change in the governance could help? And I think François asked, but others also have referred to know-how in others, ESAs. Do you think there's something that we can learn from how other SSM or, for example, EIOPA would work that could be useful for ESMA? But then, of course, the last question is the one that Christophe Bory asked. What can we expect and when?
Thank you very much for the last question. No, when I look at ESMA, I think ESMA has a large and appropriate toolbox, and it uses the toolbox in an effective way to a large extent. We produced a report on that in 2022, showing that many tools are indeed useful to foster supervisory convergence, like the amended peer reviews, the common supervisory actions, the informal colleges. We have a number of things that work in a quite satisfactory way. Now, of course, other tools are not so much used: binding mediation, the breach of union law procedure, the no action letters. We have seen some, but maybe there could be more. So we will have in the coming months, I think, to analyze the reasons as to why some tools work well, others don't. Governance may be part of the explanation for some of the tools, with maybe members of the board not very keen to use certain tools because they could be victims of the same tools a few months later. We've seen that not in ESMA. Well, I've seen that not in ESMA yet, but I've seen it elsewhere. So, of course, that may happen. But there are also more complex reasons that have to do, with the triggering processes, the complexity of the procedures. So we will need to analyze the reasons. What we see also probably is that there is a lack of convergence on enforcement actions and on sanctions. I think ESMA is developing a work stream on that. I think it needs to be pursued because we need more convergence and effectiveness in that area. Clearly, we have supervisory convergence. I think the three ESAs have developed a lot of supervisory convergence since their creation. In a way, I think the trend is accelerating thanks to some of the new tools. But when we hear market participants, we understand also that we are not there yet, and especially for those active on a pan-European scale and those that want to distribute products across member states, they still face different legal systems, different supervisory arrangements, different supervisory requests, which make business difficult. So we will look at that, and surely I would say as a minimum, there is probably scope to enhance supervisory convergence even further, to give more weight to ESMA as the center of the system. And in doing that, of course, clearly we'll need to think about costs. I mean, whatever we do when it comes to supervisory reforms, I think Benoit highlighted that in very stark terms. We need to make sure that we remain cost effective. Now, on the next step, since we don't have much time, I will be very brief. I think the first step for the Commission will be to put out a strategy on the Savings and Investment Union, looking at all relevant areas, retail participation, market infrastructures, and also supervision. And then we'll need to see what we propose in effect, and also what will be the sequencing. That still needs to be decided by the College of Commissioners. But we have a request from the European Council to analyze, what could be done, what should be done in terms of more European supervision. So we are going to do that. We will do in-depth work on that, and then we'll have to define exactly what kind of proposals we make. Of course, we need to look at the political landscape to determine exactly what is, realistic and what is not. I personally think that the Commission should be ambitious, but ambition should be backed by a very solid business case. And ambition should go in tandem, with political realism in this area. We have to see if there can be quick wins. We hear lots of member states saying that it would make sense for ESMA to become the supervisor of crypto asset providers and venues. We have to see whether there are ways to advance on that, maybe more rapidly than on other themes. But again, first step is to define an overall balanced strategy, and supervision will fit in that strategy. And this will also be a basis for further consultations and discussions. So I am hopeful that such a strategy can be out relatively soon so that we can continue the discussion.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. I think they deserve a row of applause. As you can see, there's always room for improvement, and we are moving step by step to a digital world that works. President, Chair, Director, dear speakers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you first to Minister Eric Lombard for his strong commitment and support. Thank you to the Ministry of the Economy, Finance, Industrial and Digital Sovereignty, not only for hosting this seminar and for your commitment to this subject. And I think we have another fine demonstration of this morning, but also for the consistent support on this item. I see this seminar and its raison d'être, the discussion paper produced, the debate paper produced under the responsibility of AEFR, as a step towards the commitment we made here together 14 months ago at a seminar on the CMU, before it was renamed Union for Savings and Investment, and where Christian Noyer was present. Some people were wondering why he was there. I think now everybody knows why he was there. Thank you also to you, Robert Ophel. The AEFR owes you a great deal, not only because you invented it, but also because you took on the responsibility for leading the drafting of this debate paper. It takes us both back to the previous battle when we tried to build on the basis of the previous Commission proposal a strong reform of the ESAs back in 1917, 1919. And thank you to those of you who today said that this reform has not been a full fiasco, but maybe a step forward. Thank you to you, Fabrice de Marigny. You are always on board when we come to discuss serious subject. And from the moment we first met, when you were trying to put these subjects at the top of the CESAR agenda as General Secretary. Thank you to each of you, dear speakers. You've been exactly where we were expecting you to be. You were blunt. You were trying to be convincing. I think you made some arguments. And your commitment and your inspiring word, I hope, will be helpful to move a step forward. But also I have to thank all those who are present in the room and who did contribute to the debate paper produced by AEFR. I would like to apologize to those who were not able to join us this morning because there are many other meetings. Just to mention some en passant, the ECOFIN, somewhere in Brussels, where I believe the minister is today trying to convince his partner on some topics. I don't need to enter into the detail. There's a plenary session in Strasbourg for the European Parliament, and some market participants, but not only, are trying to have this kind of discussion in Davos. I also have to apologize vis-à-vis you, the audience, because maybe it was a bit too ambitious, but we had some Q&A session for each panel, and you were not able to raise any question. We will do better next time. I understand that this morning we've been trying to address 3 questions: the what, the why, and the how. As regards the how, I remember a discussion I had one day with David Wright, maybe just at the beginning of the ESR review in 2017, in which we concluded that for some after some effort based on improving product legislation, time might come for institutional move. And maybe this time has come. And I believe this is also why Christine Lagarde had this strong call for a Keynesian shift, or that the President of the Republic, in his speech at Sorbonne II, mentioned also this urgent matter to move on single supervision. Regarding the why, I think the discussion this morning was very helpful, and listening carefully to Enrico Letta's argument, I think is also very helpful. After the Draghi report, the new buzzword in Brussels is simplification. I think Martin Marlin will not contradict me. And the best way to achieve this for financial market may well be a single supervision system. And many of you also mentioned this point, how to enter the discussion. I also heard what Robert Ophel told us this morning. To enable national supervisors to exercise their responsibility properly, you will further complicate the current supervision landscape and make it unworkable. The added value of exercising these responsibilities at EU level will become obvious. And I'm also convinced that this issue should not be examined solely by us, the financial market expert, if I may call us like this, because then we could end up in a self-blocking factors due to the debate between home host member state, the producers and the consumer of financial market, the reason of sovereignty. And I remember a discussion with someone who is now finance minister of a large member state, and who told me at the end of the negotiation of the ESA's 2019 revision, I agree with European authority, but only if they are nationally driven. I agree with and I think this is exactly where we stand today. That's why we need to start the discussion from the other side of the hill. The EU needs major investment, but the EU savings are going outside. I'd like to take a stand here against the so-called good idea, even though it has not been mentioned today, but maybe it was not on the agenda, that more pension fund is the solution for the EU. For many reasons, I think I don't need to recall, it's a false good idea, and this is why at the AFR we are currently working on a future discussion paper, debate paper, on long-term investment in employee savings. Let's also try to stop being naive when we see how the big beneficiary of this fragmentation, Let's also try to stop being naive when we see how the big beneficiary, the big beneficiary of this fragmentation are. Those who can build their offensive on a truly integrated market. And we have to acknowledge today that we didn't maybe take all the dimension of this debate when we tried to draft the MiCA text, and I understand that now it's maybe a file that is ready for a next step. I think this case, we have to know that this issue has not just arose right now because of the election of a new president on the other side of the Atlantic. It's been there for some time, and maybe it's time to address it. As for the how, I understand that we need to learn from what has been successfully done with SSM, even though we cannot fully compare the banking sector with capital market, just because it's not the same in relation to citizens, in relation to concentration in the market, among the market players, and also in terms of independence of a supervisor. Nevertheless, I think there's been a practice, an experience that we have to learn from, and also that we can look what is possible based on the example of AMLA. Okay, and I know the argument that AMLA is something that is new, that is not so much digged into national supervision. Nevertheless, there is here a model of governance that is quite at a level of ambition that needs to be looked at carefully. So now that we have dealt with the what, with the why and the how, maybe it's time to address the time of the when. And I understand the Commission may be thinking about a strategy, and I hope that our work this morning will be helpful in this direction. But beyond that, I think the method should be, first, to make a granular analysis of the needs, which is the purpose of the AFR debate paper, insofar as it concerns users, market infrastructure, and asset manager, and maybe could be considered as a starting point for this efficiency test that has been called upon. Second, to ensure the right political ownership, and for that, I'm counting on all of you to convince the non-expert, all those who ordered and understand the Mario Draghi alarm diagnostic. That's the political dimension of the field, and it's clearly the one that many of you have been addressing this morning. Third, we have to make sure that we don't lose the right target during the execution channel. And here, dear Martine Merlin, we are counting on you to overcome the weight of the legacy of the 2019 ESA reform and convince the Commission President that this topic must be at the heart of her mandate. I want to see the new name of the Commissioner portfolio, a saving and investment union, as a sign of optimism, even though words are nothing if they are not translated in deep proofs. I do hope for this ambitious agenda, you will leave this room with a full basket of good argument, and I thank you, all of you, very much for attending this conference, and I wish you a very good day and wish you to see you again in other AFR work. Thank you so much.